In the forgotten valley of Havenbrook, where mountain pines whisper secrets of the old world, lives a foreign widow whose delicate hands craft the finest pastries in 5 counties. Elise Morgan has spent 4 years building a modest bakery and a quiet life, but beneath her refined accent and gentle smile lies a past written in royal blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you, once known as the Shadow, the most lethal protection officer in the Eastern European Royal Guard, with more diplomatic saves than any security detail on record. Before we delve into her story, let's explore how a woman trained to protect royalty now finds herself kneading dough at dawn in a remote American town, and what happens when the violence she left behind comes searching for new territory. Morning. Light filters through frost-patterned windows as Elise Morgan works in her bakery, the Golden Hearth. Her capable hands fold delicate pastry dough with measured precision, each motion efficient and deliberate. At 42, she carries herself with a quiet dignity that the townspeople attribute to her European upbringing. Her dark hair, streaked with elegant silver at the temples, is tied back neatly, revealing high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that notice everything while seeming to focus only on her craft. The bakery sits at the edge of Havenbrook's main street, its warm glow a beacon in the pre-dawn hours when most of the mountain town still sleeps. Inside, copper pots hang in perfect alignment above an immaculate workstation. Each utensil sits in a precise location, not just organized but positioned for optimal efficiency of movement. A casual observer would note only an exceptionally tidy baker, but someone with military training might recognize the careful positioning that allows every tool to be accessed with minimal motion. "Morning, Mrs. Morgan," calls Daniel Turner, the 16-year-old son of Havenbrook's sheriff, as he enters through the back door for his morning shift. "Brought the fresh eggs from the Miller farm like you asked." "Good morning, Daniel," Elise responds, her voice carrying a subtle accent that 4 years in rural Colorado hasn't entirely erased. "Please set them in the refrigerator." Her eyes instinctively track his movement, while her hands never pause in their work, a habit from years when looking away could mean death for her charge. What Daniel doesn't see, what no one in Havenbrook sees, is how each bakery shelf is reinforced with steel backing, how the heavy marble countertop could serve as ballistic cover, how the ornamental rolling pins displayed on the wall would balance perfectly as throwing weapons if needed. The bread paddle hanging innocuously by the old brick oven is weighted on one end, balanced for defensive strikes. The vintage flour canisters each conceal a small cache of emergency supplies. "Sheriff says there's a town meeting tonight about those strangers passing through," Daniel mentions casually. "Says you should come, being on the edge of town and all." Elise merely nods, her focus seemingly on the pastry before her, though her mind instantly categorizes this information alongside other subtle changes she's noted in recent days. 3 unfamiliar vehicles with out-of-state plates, a conversation at the general store about property values, questions at the post office about who owns what land. "I'll consider it," she replies, her voice carrying that unique softness that somehow makes people lean in slightly to hear her. It's a technique she learned long ago. Speak softly, and people pay closer attention, reveal more than they intend. Through her window, Elise watches Sheriff Turner make his morning rounds, his gait and posture revealing a man who takes his responsibilities seriously but hasn't faced true violence. Her eyes automatically scan for sightlines, calculating distances, identifying potential cover, habits she maintains despite 4 years of peaceful small-town life. The bell above the door chimes as Amy Reynolds, who runs the local diner, enters with her customary enthusiasm. Elise, your croissants saved my breakfast service yesterday. The hiking group from Denver practically fought over the last one. She laughs, setting her empty basket on the counter. Can I get another 2 dozen for today? And maybe those little chocolate things the Wallace kids love? Of course, Elise answers, already moving to gather Amy's order, her body shifting with an economy of motion that speaks of disciplined training rather than mere efficiency. Pain au chocolat. The recipe is from my grandmother. The lie comes easily, practiced over 4 years of crafting her cover story. Her grandmother had been many things, a resistance fighter during occupation, later a government minister, but never a baker. The recipe had actually come from a French pastry chef who'd once been assigned to the royal residence where Elise had served. Have you met the new folks asking about buying land? Amy asks, leaning against the counter. 3 men and a woman, driving those fancy black SUVs. Say they represent some investment company looking for untapped potential. Amy makes air quotes with her fingers, her expression skeptical. I haven't had the pleasure, Elise replies, though she's noted their vehicles passing her property twice in the past 3 days, driving slower than normal traffic, observing. Old instincts had prompted her to memorize their license plates, to note the driver's military-style haircut, to spot the unnatural bulge of concealed weapons beneath expensive jackets. Well, they've been asking all kinds of questions about property values, local businesses, who owns what. Particularly interested in the old mining access roads, Amy continues, unaware that Elise is absorbing every detail with professional assessment. Sheriff Turner doesn't like the feel of them, says they're too polished for genuine investors, too interested in our security measures, or lack thereof. Elise's hands maintain their steady work as she wraps Amy's order, but her mind shifts, and through potential scenarios, with the cool efficiency that once made her the most sought-after protection specialist in Eastern Europe. It's probably nothing, Amy dismisses with a wave, but you know how protective the sheriff is of our little town. It's good to be cautious, Elise offers neutrally, though her mind has already categorized these strangers as a potential threat requiring further assessment. After Amy leaves, Elise moves to the large brick oven at the back of her bakery, ostensibly to check the sourdough loaves baking inside. The action allows her to glance out the rear window, confirming what she already suspects. One of the black SUVs is parked across the street, its occupant watching her building with casual interest that doesn't fool her for a second. Surveillance. Professional but not top-tier. Government-trained, perhaps, but not government-controlled. Private sector operators with military backgrounds. Her assessment comes automatically. Years of training categorizing potential threats with detached precision. The bell chimes again as Mayor Wilson enters, his usual jovial expression replaced with concern. Mrs. Morgan, he greets, his voice lower than usual. Just wanted to make sure you'll be at tonight's town meeting. Some matters that might concern you, being out here on the edge of town. I've heard there are investors interested in our little community, she responds, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that makes him blink first. Yes, well, that's part of it. He glances around the empty bakery before continuing. Between us, I don't like them. Too smooth, too rehearsed, asking about our police response times, our emergency services. Strange questions for property developers. Mayor. Wilson doesn't notice how Elise's posture shifts subtly, how her weight redistributes to her toes, how her hand rests near the heavy rolling pin within easy reach. All unconscious preparations for potential threats that 4 years of peace haven't erased. I appreciate the warning, she says simply. I'll be there. After he leaves, Elise moves with a new purpose. She flips the sign on her door to closed for lunch, despite it being only 10 a.m. In the privacy of her kitchen, she pulls out her phone, not her everyday device, but a secondary one kept hidden. In a hollowed-out cookbook, she types a brief message, potential situation in Havenbrook. Surveillance noted. Background check required on Pinnacle Investments. The message goes to a secure address that hasn't been used in 4 years. An old colleague from her previous life who had helped arrange her disappearance after the assassination attempt that had claimed her principal's life and left her officially dead as well. While waiting for a response, Elise does what she's done every day for 4 years. She checks her security measures. The bakery appears ordinary to townspeople, but it's built like a fortress. Reinforced doors, impact-resistant glass disguised as charming vintage panes, strategic sightlines to all approaches, multiple exit routes concealed as service paths. 4 years of peace haven't dulled her preparedness. Each bread delivery has brought components for security systems. Each renovation has added another layer of protection. Her weekly orders of specialty European flours have sometimes concealed equipment or information from her former colleagues. Behind the supply pantry, hidden by a false wall that appears to be vintage brick, matching the bakery's historic construction, lies a small room containing emergency supplies, communications equipment, weapons, and multiple sets of identification documents. The room that not even Daniel, who has worked for her for 2 years, knows exists. Elise checks her phone to find a response already waiting. Pinnacle Investments, shell company, traced to Garrett Sullivan, former military contractor, known, associate of Viktor Krasnov. The name sends an electric current through her system. Viktor Krasnov, the man responsible for the assassination of the crown prince she had been assigned to protect. The attack that had left her with the scar that runs from her collarbone to her right shoulder, hidden beneath her high-necked baker's coat. The man she had believed was in prison in her homeland. She types back, confirmed sighting. The response comes quickly. Negative, Sullivan only. Krasnov released 3 months ago. Whereabouts unknown. Elise's mind calculates possibilities with cold efficiency. Sullivan is Krasnov's known associate. His presence in Havenbrook cannot be coincidence. Either he's found her, or he's setting up an operation in what he believes is unprotected territory. Neither possibility bodes well for the town she's come to call home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The phone buzzes once more. Sending file on Sullivan. Associates identified in region. Additional assets on standby if required. 4 years ago, Elise Morgan had walked away from violence, from duty, from the weight of royal protection. After failing to save the prince, after being declared dead alongside him, she had chosen a new life in a place where no one would look for a supposedly deceased Eastern European security specialist. Now, it seems her past has found her regardless. The afternoon passes with Elise maintaining her careful routine, serving customers, preparing dough for tomorrow, smiling and chatting about local matters, while her mind works on contingency plans. With methodical precision, through her window, she observes Sullivan himself walking down the main street with Sheriff Turner, gesturing expansively as if sharing grand visions for development. The sheriff's posture reveals skepticism, but also the fundamental disadvantage of a good man who cannot recognize the predator walking beside him. Sullivan is exactly as his file described, 6'2", military bearing despite the expensive, casual clothes, the confidence of someone accustomed to violence who believes himself among sheep rather than wolves. His right hand gestures naturally, but his left remains suspiciously still, likely concealing an injury sustained in his last known operation. Most telling is how his eyes scan the street, buildings and sightlines with the same automatic assessment that Elise herself performs daily. His gaze pauses on her bakery momentarily, and though she appears absorbed in serving Mrs. Wallace and her children, Elise notes how his attention lingers on her building's unusual reinforcements disguised as charming renovations. For a moment, just a flicker, their eyes meet through the window. Elise keeps her expression pleasant, embodying the unassuming baker the town knows her to be. Sullivan's face reveals nothing, but she recognizes the subtle shift in his stance, the unconscious preparation for potential threat assessment. He's good, not as good as she is, but dangerous nonetheless. As afternoon fades toward evening, Elise closes her bakery with practiced efficiency. She retrieves a small case from behind the false wall, containing items she hasn't used in 4 years. A slim composite knife that won't trigger metal detectors, a garrote disguised as an ordinary hair tie, and a small communication device that connects to her secure network. She dresses for the town meeting with careful consideration, layers that won't restrict movement, boots that allow for quick response, a scarf that could serve multiple tactical purposes if needed. To the townspeople, she'll appear as she always does, the elegant European widow who brings old-world charm to their community. Only she knows that every aspect of her appearance is calculated for optimal defensive capability. As Elise locks her bakery door, she spots another black SUV parked half a block away, its occupants watching with professional disinterest that doesn't fool her. 4 years ago, she was the shield between royalty and those who would do them harm. Now, as she walks toward the town hall where Havenbrook's residents are gathering, she feels that mantle settling across her shoulders once more. These people, Daniel, who brings her eggs each morning, Amy, who champions her pastries, Mayor Wilson, who ensured her building permits were expedited when she arrived, have become her responsibility. Sullivan and whoever accompanies him have come to her town, her territory, threatening people under her protection. 4 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. Sullivan and his employers are about to learn why her code name in the Royal Protection Service was the Shadow. She struck without warning, neutralized threats without being seen, and those who underestimated her rarely lived to make the same. Mistake twice. The evening light fades as Elise Morgan walks down Havenbrook's main street toward the town meeting. To observers, she's merely a respected local business owner. Only she knows that with each step, the shadow draws closer to returning. The town hall's wooden floors creak beneath Elise's careful steps as she enters the meeting already in progress. Her arrival draws brief glances. The European baker tends to keep to herself, but the residents of Havenbrook have grown accustomed to her reserved nature over the past 4 years. She selects a seat near the rear exit, a habit she doesn't bother disguising anymore. The townspeople attribute it to her preference for privacy. None suspect it's because the position offers optimal sightlines and multiple egress options. Mayor Wilson stands at the front, gesturing toward a projected map of Havenbrook and the surrounding wilderness. Beside him, Garrett Sullivan presents, the very image of professional enthusiasm in his tailored casual wear, pointing to highlighted areas with investment potential. 3 of his associates line the wall behind him. 2 men and 1 woman, all with the same alertness that Elise recognizes immediately as military training. As I was explaining, Sullivan continues, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of someone accustomed to command, Pinnacle Investment sees tremendous potential in Havenbrook. The pristine wilderness, the historic downtown, all of it, just waiting for the right development approach. Sheriff Turner, arms crossed over his chest, interjects, "And what exactly does this right development look like, Mr. Sullivan?" Elise studies the interaction with professional assessment, cataloging details ordinary observers would miss. Sullivan's associates maintain casual postures, but their weight distribution betrays readiness for rapid response. The woman scans the room with methodical precision, her gaze pausing fractionally on exits and potential threats. The taller man has a slight protrusion beneath his left arm, concealed holster, compact semi-automatic, Elise estimates. This is not an investment. Team. This is an advanced force. The following morning returns Elise to her bakery's routine, though the familiar rhythm now serves as cover for heightened vigilance. She arrives at 4 a.m., performing her security sweep disguised as morning preparation. Each window check appears to be nothing more than a baker ensuring proper light. Each door verification seems merely a businesswoman confirming her property is secure. By 4:30, the first batch of bread dough rests in proofing baskets. Elise's hands work with practiced efficiency, the repetitive motion of kneading a form of moving meditation that allows her mind to process the information gathered at last night's meeting. Sullivan's proposal had been comprehensive and superficially appealing. Investment in local businesses, renovation of historic properties, development of luxury vacation rentals on surrounding land. His presentation had been met with mixed reactions: enthusiasm from struggling business owners, skepticism from multi-generation residents, and outright suspicion from Sheriff Turner. Elise had observed it all without comment, her focus not on Sullivan's words, but on what remained unsaid. His particular interest in remote properties with mountain access, his questions about emergency response protocols, the careful mapping of power and communication infrastructure. Sullivan wasn't planning development. He was assessing strategic control points. The bell above the door chimes at precisely 5:45 a.m. as Daniel arrives for his morning shift, his teenager's perpetual weariness balanced by conscientious work ethic. "Morning, Mrs. Morgan," he yawns, hanging his jacket on the designated hook. "Good morning, Daniel. The sourdough starter needs feeding," she responds, gesturing toward the large ceramic crock she maintains with scientific precision. Their morning follows its usual choreography, Daniel handling front counter preparations while Elise manages the baking schedule. Between tasks, she provides gentle correction to his technique, teaching him the craft she has perfected over 4 years of dedicated practice. Like this, she demonstrates, her hands shaping a baguette with elegant efficiency. Even pressure, consistent motion. Daniel attempts to mimic her movements, his young hands lacking her refined muscle control. "I don't know how you make it look so easy." What Elise doesn't explain is that the precise motor control required for artisanal baking had been honed through years of weapons training, that the patience needed for perfect fermentation had been developed during surveillance operations, that her ability to track multiple baking timelines simultaneously had once been used to coordinate security details for diplomatic events. "Practice," she says simply. "Consistency and attention." The morning rush begins at 7 a.m. sharp, a steady stream of regulars collecting their daily bread and pastries. Elise greets each by name, maintaining the warm but reserved demeanor they've come to expect. She exchanges pleasantries with Amanda Lewis, who teaches at the local school, discusses weekend weather predictions with Robert Jenkins from the hardware store, and recommends a heartier rye bread to Eleanor Simmons, who mentions her grandchildren are visiting. Through all these interactions, Elise's situational awareness never falters. She notes the black SUV that passes by twice during the morning hours. She catalogues unfamiliar faces that pause too long before the bakery window. She marks the sudden increase in communication among Sullivan's team members, visible in their more frequent appearances on Main Street, phones in hand. At 10:30, Sheriff Turner enters, removing his hat as the bell announces his arrival. "Mrs. Morgan," he greets with a nod. "The usual, please." Elise retrieves his standing order, 2 cranberry scones and a loaf of whole wheat, while he leans against the counter, his posture deliberately casual. "Those investors still giving you a good feeling?" she asks, though she already knows the answer from his tense shoulders and vigilant eyes. Turner shakes his head slightly. "Something's off. Can't put my finger on it, but 20 years wearing this badge teaches you to trust your gut." "Perhaps they're not who they claim to be," Elise offers, wrapping his order with precise folds. Maybe. He accepts the package, hesitating before adding, "They've been asking about you, you know." Though her hands maintain their steady motion. Counting change, Elise's mental calculations instantly shift to higher alert. "Oh, I can't imagine why I'd interest investors." Said they were curious about foreign business owners in the area. "How you established yourself here." Turner's eyes, sharper than most in Havenbrook give him credit for, study her reaction. "Thought you should know." "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your discretion." She meets his gaze with composed appreciation, revealing nothing of the contingency. Plans already activating in her mind. After he leaves, Elise continues her day with apparent normalcy, though her preparations have accelerated. When Daniel steps out for lunch, she retrieves a small package from beneath the loose floorboard in her office, a satellite phone that connects to a very particular network. She sends a simple text, "Timeline compromised, assets required." The response arrives within minutes. "Assets en route, 24 hours. Maintain cover." By late afternoon, with the bakery temporarily empty, Elise uses the opportunity to access her secure room behind the false wall. Inside, she activates additional surveillance systems concealed throughout Havenbrook. Cameras disguised as vintage decorations on various buildings, motion sensors embedded in seemingly ordinary landscape features, all installed gradually over 4 years through careful renovation contracts and volunteer beautification projects she had sponsored. The monitors reveal Sullivan's team has expanded overnight. 2 additional operatives have arrived, taking rooms at the Mountain View Inn. Their behavior patterns confirm Elise's assessment. Systematic reconnaissance of potential resistance points, communication infrastructure, and access routes. More concerning is the live feed from the camera overlooking the sheriff's office. Sullivan stands in Turner's doorway, his posture superficially friendly, but carrying underlying tension that Elise reads immediately. Their conversation, while inaudible, shows classic intimidation tactics. Sullivan repeatedly invading Turner's personal space, gesturing toward out-of-view documents with authoritative emphasis. Elise's attention shifts to another monitor showing the rear of the bank, where Sullivan's female associate speaks with Marcus Hendricks, the bank manager, her hand resting casually near a concealed weapon as Hendricks nervously unlocks the service entrance. They're securing key infrastructure, preparing for something imminent. Elise closes the hidden room and returns to her bakery, where afternoon customers find her as composed and attentive as always. Only she knows that beneath the counter, her hand has activated a signal to her network, accelerating their response timeline. As evening approaches, Elise completes her closing routine with methodical precision. She accepts a delivery of flour and specialty ingredients from Carson's regional supply. Her regular Thursday shipment, that unknown to anyone in Havenbrook, contains communication equipment and tactical supplies smuggled in by associates who have maintained her cover for 4 years. "Extra heavy this week," comments Jackson Carson as he hefts bags of imported flour onto her storage shelves. "Special order for the festival next weekend," Elise explains, signing his delivery form while mentally cataloguing the concealed equipment now in her possession. "Thank you, Jackson. Please give my regards to your mother." After he leaves, Elise secures the bakery with practiced efficiency. To casual observation, she's simply a meticulous business owner, ensuring her property is protected overnight. In reality, each lock check activates additional security measures. Each window closure confirms surveillance sightlines. Each adjustment of shutters includes verification of defensive positions she's established throughout the property. With the bakery secured, Elise retreats to her residence, a modest cottage behind the commercial building, connected by a covered walkway that appears decorative but provides concealed transit between structures. Inside, the cottage reflects the same careful balance of cover identity and tactical preparation as the bakery. Visitors to Elise's home, a rare occurrence, as she maintains polite but distant relationships with most Havenbrook residents. Wood. Notice the tasteful European-influenced decor, the well-appointed kitchen where she tests new recipes, the bookshelves filled with volumes on baking, European history, and local Colorado wildlife. They might admire the handcrafted furniture, the carefully tended houseplants, the collection of landscape photography decorating her walls. What they wouldn't notice is how each furniture piece is positioned to provide cover during an assault, how the heavy wooden coffee table conceals a cache of defensive tools, how the vintage record player contains communications equipment connected to her security network. Elise prepares a simple dinner, roasted vegetables and herb chicken. Her movements in the kitchen carrying the same precision she applies to her baking. As she eats, she reviews security feeds on a tablet disguised as a digital cookbook, monitoring Sullivan's team as they continue their preparations throughout Havenbrook. 2 operatives now maintain surveillance on her property from a parked vehicle. 2 blocks away, amateur work compared to what she's accustomed to, but concerning nonetheless. Sullivan himself dines with Mayor Wilson at the lone upscale restaurant in town. His animated conversation and generous wine pours clearly intended to extract information. More alarming is the activity at the Mountain Vista Hotel on the edge of a town, where 3 new arrivals check in, carrying duffel bags with the distinctive weight distribution of tactical equipment. Elise zooms the camera feed, capturing faces she immediately cross-references against her database. The results confirm her worst fears. 2 former associates of Viktor Krasnov, known operational specialists with histories of preparation work for takeovers of isolated communities. Their presence transforms Sullivan's operation from concerning to imminent threat. After dinner, Elise performs her nightly fitness routine, a carefully maintained regimen disguised as health-conscious exercise, but actually designed to preserve the combat capabilities that once made her the most effective protection officer in the Royal Service. Each stretch maintains flexibility essential for close-quarters combat. Each strength exercise ensures she can execute necessary defensive techniques. Each balance position preserves the body control required for her specialized skill set. As she completes her routine, Elise's secure phone vibrates with an incoming message. Assets in position by 0600. Defensive protocol initiated. Transmit. Situation assessment. She responds with encrypted code confirming receipt, then prepares the detailed briefing her network requires. Her report is clinical and comprehensive. Sullivan's team composition and positions, identified associates, pattern analysis suggesting imminent action, strategic vulnerabilities in Havenbrook's infrastructure, and her preliminary defensive preparations. Before transmitting, she adds a final note. Primary objective remains civilian protection. Havenbrook residents are non-combatants requiring full protective measures. In her former life, Elise had been responsible solely for maintaining the safety of her assigned principal, usually royal family members or high-ranking government officials. Now her self-assigned mission encompasses an entire community of people who have no idea of the threat gathering around them, who know her only as the talented European baker who keeps to herself. As night settles over Havenbrook, Elise completes her evening by reviewing the town's layout once more, mentally mapping defensive positions, evacuation routes, and potential safe zones. 4 years of careful observation and subtle preparation have created a protective infrastructure invisible to residents, but immediately accessible to someone with her training. She permits herself 3 hours of sleep, the optimal rest cycle. She'd learned during protection service training, before rising at 2 a.m. to begin final preparations. Dressed in black athletic wear that could pass for ordinary workout clothes but allows optimal movement, she slips through the pre-dawn darkness to check her defensive positions. Havenbrook sleeps peacefully, unaware of the shadow moving through its streets with practiced invisibility. Elise verifies each component of her security network, adjusts surveillance equipment to optimize coverage of Sullivan's team, and places additional emergency supplies at designated safe houses, all while appearing to be nothing more than an early rising baker preparing for her day. By 4 a.m., she returns to her bakery, beginning her normal morning routine as if this day were like any other in the past 4 years. Dough that was prepared and refrigerated the previous evening is brought to room temperature. Ovens preheat to precise temperatures. Work surfaces are sanitized with methodical care. Yet beneath this ordinary routine, Elise prepares for what her intelligence suggests will be Sullivan's first coordinated move against Havenbrook. The morning light will bring not just customers seeking fresh bread, but the activation of a threat 4 years of peace have been her preparation to counter. As she works, Elise reflects on the life she's built in this small mountain town. The business created with painstaking attention to detail. The relationships formed with careful consideration. The reputation established through consistent service. For 4 years, she has been Elise Morgan, respected baker and quiet widow, leaving behind the codename and responsibilities that once defined her existence. But beneath the flour-dusted hands and gentle accent, the shadow has remained vigilant, watchful, prepared. Sullivan and his team believe they've found an isolated community ripe for exploitation. Instead, they've unknowingly entered the territory of one of the most lethal protection specialists ever to serve the Royal Guard. The pre-dawn darkness begins to lighten toward morning as Elise slides the first batch of bread into the oven. Through her window, she notes the black SUV making another pass, the third since midnight. Their increasing surveillance suggests imminent action, likely coordinated with the arrival of additional operatives observed the previous evening. 4 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. Sullivan's team is about to learn that the most dangerous person in Havenbrook isn't the sheriff with his limited deputies, but the quiet foreign widow whose hands craft perfect pastries each morning with the same precision they once used to neutralize threats to the crown. The morning rush at the Golden Hearth proceeds with its usual rhythm, though Elise notes a distinct undercurrent of tension among her customers. News travels quickly in small towns, and Sullivan's investment presentation has clearly divided Havenbrook's residents. Heard they're offering Bradley Jenkins 3 times market value for his hunting lodge property, Martha Wilson, the mayor's wife, mentions while selecting a loaf of multigrain. That access road up there leads straight to the old fire watchtower, prime spot for one of those luxury vacation rentals they're proposing. Elise hums non-committally as she wraps Martha's bread, though her mind immediately maps the strategic significance. The watchtower offers commanding views of the entire valley, and the access road provides the most direct route to the mountain pass leading out of town. "What do you think about all this development talk, Elise?" Martha presses. "You've built such a lovely business here. Would more tourism help or hurt, do you think?" "Change is inevitable," Elise replies diplomatically, though careful consideration of what's truly being offered seems wise. The bell chimes as Daniel enters for his afternoon shift, his normally carefree teenage expression replaced with unusual seriousness. "Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Morgan. Got held up at school." He ties on his apron with practiced efficiency, lowering his voice once Martha moves away. "There's something weird happening. Dad was on the phone all morning with the county sheriff's office. Their communication system went down last night. Radio, computer network, everything. Elise's hands maintain their steady work portioning dough, but her attention sharpens. Equipment failures happen, especially in remote areas, she offers, though her mind immediately catalogues this as the first move in Sullivan's operation. Isolation of local law enforcement. Yeah, but Dad says it's not just regular failure. Someone physically cut the fiber optic lines and disabled the radio repeaters on Langston Ridge. Daniel's eyes reflect genuine concern. And 2 of his deputies called in sick today. Same weird stomach bug all of a sudden. Neutralization of communication. Infrastructure followed by reduction of security personnel. Classic preparation for community takeover operations. Elise has seen this pattern before in her former life and has even prevented such operations in small European villages under her protection detail's jurisdiction. "I'm sure Sheriff Turner has contingency plans," she assures Daniel, though her own contingencies have now shifted to accelerated timeline protocols. Throughout the afternoon, Elise catalogues additional signs of Sullivan's operation unfolding. Mrs. Henderson from the pharmacy mentions that their prescription delivery was unexpectedly delayed, the supply route coincidentally blocked by a fallen tree across the mountain highway. Jason Maxwell, who operates the local gas station, reports that his fuel delivery has been postponed due to scheduling issues with the regional distributor. Systematic isolation, cutting off communications, limiting law enforcement capability, controlling supply routes, restricting fuel access. Sullivan is creating a contained environment using textbook methods for rural community control operations. The bell chimes again at precisely 3:17 p.m., admitting the woman Elise has identified as Sullivan's second-in-command, mid-30s, athletic, built disguised beneath casual designer clothing, a studied casualness that doesn't quite mask her tactical awareness. The woman scans the bakery with practiced nonchalance, her eyes performing the same security assessment Elise conducts hourly. "Welcome to the Golden Hearth," Elise greets with professional warmth, nothing in her demeanor revealing that she's already identified the concealed weapon at the woman's ankle. The communication device disguised as a fitness tracker, the reinforced watch that likely contains tactical tools. "Your shop comes highly recommended," the woman responds with an easy smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "I'm Rebecca Hayes, part of the Pinnacle investment team. Thought I'd sample the local cuisine while we're in town." Her accent suggests West Coast education overlaying Midwestern origins, though Elise detects the faintest traces of specialized linguistic training designed to make her speech pattern difficult to place. "What can I offer you today?" Elise asks, maintaining her role as the unassuming baker while mentally calculating the optimal defensive positions should this encounter escalate beyond reconnaissance. Hayes selects a pain au chocolat and espresso, then casually leans against the counter. "You've created something special here. European training, I assume." "My grandmother's recipes," Elise responds with practiced modesty. "Family traditions." "It's impressive what skilled hands can create," Hayes remarks, her gaze dropping briefly to Elise's flour-dusted fingers. "You must have dedicated years to developing such expertise." The statement carries subtle weight, an assessment disguised as compliment. Elise recognizes the technique. She's employed it herself when evaluating potential security risks. "Dedication is essential to any craft," she answers, wiping her hands on her apron. "Whether baking or investment analysis." The faintest flicker of surprise crosses Hayes's features, recognition that her surface-level cover story isn't being fully accepted. Indeed. Speaking of investment, our team has been assessing local businesses with expansion potential. Your establishment has a unique position in the community. Perhaps we could discuss possibilities. "I'm quite content with my current operation," Elise replies, sliding the espresso across the counter. "Small scale allows for quality control." Hayes takes a deliberate sip, maintaining eye contact. "Quality is precisely what interests us. Your background in particular. It's not often one finds European expertise in rural Colorado." The conversation has shifted from casual reconnaissance to direct probe. Elise's internal alert level elevates, though nothing in her external demeanor changes. Small towns often attract those seeking simpler lives, she offers. Havenbrook has been welcoming to a foreign widow, establishing a new beginning. Ah, yes, widowhood. Hayes's tone suggests skepticism. Your husband was Czech military, correct? Or was it a diplomatic service? The direct reference to elements of Elise's cover story, details not publicly emphasized in Havenbrook, confirms that Sullivan's team has been investigating her specifically, likely accessing background information that shouldn't be readily available to private investors. Austrian business consultant, actually, Elise corrects mildly, noting the deliberate misinformation attempt designed to provoke contradictory responses. I prefer to honor his memory through forward focus rather than dwelling in the past. Hayes's smile tightens fractionally. Of course, forward thinking is essential in uncertain times. She glances around the bakery, her gaze lingering on the reinforced fixtures Elise has disguised as charming renovations. Your security consciousness is admirable. Most small businesses neglect such considerations. Old European buildings taught me to value structural integrity, Elise responds, her hands automatically retrieving a cleaning cloth, the motion bringing her within optimal counter-strike distance should it become necessary. One never knows when unexpected pressure might test one's foundations. The metaphor hangs between them, both women fully aware of the underlying communication occurring beneath the superficial pleasantries. Hayes finishes her espresso with deliberate slowness, then places her cup down with precision. Mr. Sullivan is hosting a community dinner at the Mountain Vista Hotel tomorrow evening. As a prominent business owner, your presence would be valued. We have some announcements that will affect Havenbrook's future significantly. How thoughtful. I'll consider it if my baking schedule permits, Elise responds, knowing that Sullivan's timeline has now been officially declared. Tomorrow evening marks their first public move beyond reconnaissance. After Hayes departs, Elise continues her afternoon work with outward calm, serving customers and preparing dough for tomorrow's baking. Only the most perceptive observer would notice her slightly altered movements, the way she positions herself to maintain visual contact with the street, how she casually ensures Daniel remains away from window exposure, the additional attention she pays to customers mentioning Sullivan's team. When Daniel leaves for the day, Elise performs her closing routine with practiced precision. Once alone, she activates her secure communication system, transmitting updated intelligence. Operation. Timeline confirmed. Initial moves consistent with isolation protocol. Public announcement scheduled tomorrow evening as cover for primary action. The response comes within minutes. Assets in position. Defensive perimeter established. Await signal for intervention. Evening settles over Havenbrook as Elise completes additional security measures, disguised as ordinary business closing procedures. Through her surveillance network, she tracks Sullivan's team as they position themselves throughout the town with increasing boldness. Two operatives have established observation points overlooking the sheriff's office. Another monitors the power substation servicing Havenbrook. Hayes herself conducts what appears to be casual conversation with Tyler Reynolds, who manages the town's water supply infrastructure. Most concerning is the arrival of 3 additional SUVs at the Mountain Vista Hotel, their occupants moving with military precision as they unload equipment cases too large for ordinary business presentations, too carefully handled for anything but specialized tactical gear. From her vantage point in the bakery's hidden security room, Elise watches as Sullivan himself directs the operation with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to command. His gestures, posture, and distribution of personnel reveal professional training beyond ordinary private security, likely special operations background with extensive field experience. Elise's secure phone vibrates with an encrypted message. Facial recognition confirms 3 former Krasnov associates among new arrivals. Intelligence suggests major operation. Resource extraction is likely the primary objective. The pieces align with crystal clarity in Elise's tactical assessment. Havenbrook's isolation, its limited law enforcement, its strategic position controlling, access to the national forest beyond, all make it an ideal staging ground for illegal operations. The town sits at the junction of three unmarked wilderness roads that could provide unmonitored transit routes. The abandoned mining network in the surrounding mountains offers concealed storage capabilities. The tight-knit community could be leveraged for cover operations once controlled. Sullivan isn't planning simple criminal exploitation. He's establishing a forward operating base for something larger. The connection to Viktor Krasnov suggests international implications that transform this. From local threat to potential national security concern, Elise sends a coded response requesting additional intelligence on Krasnov's recent activities, then returns to her cottage to prepare for tomorrow's acceleration. From a hidden compartment beneath her bedroom floor, she retrieves equipment unused for 4 years. A lightweight tactical vest that can be concealed beneath ordinary clothing. Specialized tools designed for multiple defensive applications. Communication devices that connect to her security network. Each item she handles with the familiar precision of someone reuniting with old companions, muscle memory overriding the years of disuse as she checks, cleans, and positions each piece. For optimal access, morning arrives with unsettling quiet. Elise begins her baking routine at the customary hour, though her preparations now serve dual purpose, maintaining her cover identity while positioning resources for the coming confrontation. Each tray of pastries placed in the display case conceals tactical equipment beneath. Each specially marked bread loaf contains embedded communication devices for her network assets. Daniel arrives precisely on schedule, though Elise immediately notes his troubled expression. "Dad didn't come home last night," he says without preamble, his teenage attempt at nonchalance failing to mask genuine fear. "Mom said he called around midnight, something about checking suspicious activity at the county line. Nobody's heard from him since." Elise's tactical assessment shifts immediately. Sullivan's operation has accelerated beyond the timeline she anticipated. The neutralization of Sheriff Turner represents a significant escalation, likely indicating their preparation phase is complete. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation," she assures Daniel, though her mind is already calculating adjusted response scenarios. Cell reception is notoriously unreliable near the county line. "Yeah, but he always checks in." "Always." Daniel's voice carries the uncertainty of a child suddenly confronting adult concerns. "And Deputy Ramirez isn't answering either. Mom's really worried. Perhaps this would be a good day for you to help your mother," Elise suggests gently. "I can manage the bakery alone." "Really? But it's Saturday, your busiest day." Family comes first, Elise insists, already planning to use his absence to accelerate her defensive preparations. "Go. Help your mother contact neighboring sheriff departments if needed." After Daniel leaves, Elise immediately activates her full security network. The surveillance feeds confirm her worst fears, unusual activity at all strategic points throughout Havenbrook. Sullivan's team has established a presence at the power station, water treatment facility, and both roads leading into town. 2 of his operatives maintain position outside the sheriff's office, which shows no sign of normal morning activity. Most concerning is the loading dock behind the mountain, Vista Hotel, where crates clearly containing weapons and tactical equipment are being transferred inside under the supervision of Hayes and 2 specialists Elise recognizes from intelligence profiles as former military contractors with histories of private security operations in conflict zones. Elise's secure phone vibrates with urgent communication. "Sheriff Turner intercepted last night, currently detained at a mining office 3 km north of town. 4 guards, extraction team standing by for your signal." The situation has evolved from potential threat to active hostile operation. Sullivan's team has moved beyond preparation to implementation, neutralizing local law enforcement and securing infrastructure faster than even Elise's considerable experience had anticipated. She sends coded authorization for the extraction team to recover Sheriff Turner, then continues her morning routine with the practiced composure that once made her the most effective protection specialist in royal service. Customers entering the Golden Hearth find the European baker as collected and attentive as always, though perhaps slightly more insistent that they take extra bread in case the weather turns. Each transaction now includes subtle intelligence, gathering as Elise gently extracts information from townspeople about unusual activities they've noticed. Grace Wilkins mentions power fluctuations during the night. Michael Sawyer reports that the gas station has mysteriously closed, a handwritten sign claiming supply issues. Rebecca Chen expresses concern that her morning attempt to call her sister in Denver couldn't connect. Pattern recognition confirms Sullivan's operation proceeding according to established protocols for rural community isolation, communication disruption, resource control, security neutralization. The community dinner announced for this evening will likely serve as cover for the final phase, gathering town leadership in one controlled location while remaining operators secure key positions throughout Havenbrook. Mid-morning brings the bells. Chime as Mayor Wilson enters, his usual jovial demeanor replaced with poorly concealed anxiety. "Mrs. Morgan," he greets, glancing nervously at the black SUV now permanently stationed across the street. "Has Daniel mentioned anything about Sheriff Turner?" "Only that he didn't return home last night," Elise responds, already calculating how much to reveal to the mayor without compromising her own cover or operations. "His absence seems concerning." Wilson lowers his voice, leaning closer across the counter. "Between us, something's very wrong. Can't reach any county officials. Internet service is experiencing technical difficulties. Cell phones only work intermittently. And those investment people are suddenly everywhere, asking questions about town infrastructure that have nothing to do with development opportunities." Elise studies the mayor with new assessment. His political instincts have recognized the threat more quickly than she anticipated. "Perhaps their investment interests extend beyond commercial development," she suggests carefully. "That's putting it mildly." Wilson's voice drops further. "Found out this morning they've purchased controlling interest in our water rights through some shell company. Didn't even know that was possible until the paperwork showed up on my desk. And now, this community dinner tonight feels more like a command performance than a friendly gathering." "Do you plan to attend?" Elise asks, though she already anticipates his answer. "Don't see much choice. Half the town council's already confirmed, and Sullivan made it clear my absence would be disappointing." The mayor's expression hardens with unexpected resolve. "But I've lived in Havenbrook my entire life, Mrs. Morgan. My father was mayor before me, my grandfather before him. Whatever these people want, they'll find we're not as easily pushed around as they think." Elise recognizes the determination in his voice, the same stubborn resilience she's observed in Havenbrook's residents over 4 years of quiet integration into their community. These people, with their generational connections to this land and each other, possess a strength Sullivan's tactical assessment has likely underestimated. "Courage often comes from unexpected sources," she offers, passing him a bag containing significantly more pastries than his usual order. "Perhaps share these with neighbors today. Community connections matter in uncertain times." Wilson accepts the bag with a dawning understanding of her subtext. Yes, they certainly do. Think I'll make some personal visits this afternoon. Check on folks, especially those a bit more isolated. After he leaves, Elise returns to her surveillance monitoring, noting increased movement among Sullivan's team. additional vehicles establishing checkpoint positions on residential streets, operatives conducting final equipment checks with decreasing attempts to disguise their activities. Hayes herself directing the placement of what appear to be signal jammers at strategic locations throughout Havenbrook. Their confidence has grown too quickly, their operational security becoming sloppy with the belief that this small mountain town lacks the resources or expertise to recognize what's happening before their control is complete. They haven't identified Elise as a threat, a critical error that will shape the coming confrontation. The background check on the European baker revealed exactly what her carefully constructed cover was designed to show: a widow with appropriate documentation, a clear business history, a quiet presence in a small American town. What Sullivan's team doesn't know, what they couldn't know without access to classified files from a foreign government, is that beneath the flour-dusted apron and gentle accent lies a protector whose training, experience, and lethal capability exceed their combined operational expertise. As noon approaches, Elise's secure network delivers confirmation that Sheriff Turner has been successfully extracted, his condition stable, though requiring medical attention for resistance-related injuries. The extraction team has transported him to a secure location outside Sullivan's surveillance network where he can coordinate with federal authorities, being quietly alerted to the situation in Havenbrook. The pieces are in motion now, the confrontation inevitable. Sullivan's operation has progressed too far for peaceful resolution, their actions against Sheriff Turner crossing legal boundaries that transform them from suspicious investors to active, hostile force. Tonight's community dinner will serve as their platform for declaring control, gathering town leadership, announcing their terms, establishing the new power structure they envision for Havenbrook as their operational base. They expect to find a community unprepared for resistance, leadership, incapable of effective opposition, and resources vulnerable to immediate control. Instead, they will encounter the Shadow, who has spent 4 years preparing for precisely this type of threat, whose determination to protect her adopted community equals the legendary status she earned defending royalty, and whose specialized training in counterterrorism and hostile force neutralization once made her the most feared security operative in Eastern Europe. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across Havenbrook's main street as Elise completes her day's baking with methodical precision. To anyone observing through her shop windows, she appears focused entirely on her craft, unaware of or unconcerned by the increasing security presence throughout town. In reality, each movement serves dual purpose, maintaining her cover while preparing for the confrontation that will determine Havenbrook's fate. Sullivan's operation is proceeding exactly as expected, but so too are Elise's countermeasures, invisible to those who see only a European baker going about her daily routine. 4 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. Sullivan's team is about to discover why her code name in Royal Protection Service was spoken with fear by those who faced her, and why those who underestimated her rarely lived to make the same mistake twice. Late afternoon casts golden light across Havenbrook's main street as Elise completes her final preparations. The bakery now stands empty of customers, an unusual occurrence for a Saturday that speaks volumes about the growing tension pervading the town. Through her surveillance network, she observes residents hurrying home, casting wary glances at the black SUVs now openly stationed at key intersections, their occupants no longer bothering to disguise their vigilant observation. Sullivan's operation has transitioned from covert to overt, with surprising speed, suggesting either overconfidence or a compressed timeline driven by external factors. Elise suspects the latter, her intelligence network having flagged unusual activity in 3 neighboring states potentially connected to Krasnov's broader operation. The bell above her door chimes unexpectedly. Elise turns to find Daniel, his teenage frame silhouetted against the afternoon light, his expression a mixture of fear and determination that ages his young face. "They have my dad," he says without preamble, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Those investment people. Mom got a call. They said not to worry, that Dad's helping with security arrangements for tonight's dinner. But his patrol car is parked behind their hotel with the window smashed in." Elise studies him carefully, noting the boy's clenched fists and resolute stance. In her years of protection work, she'd learned that civilians confronting danger often became unpredictable variables, sometimes breaking under pressure, sometimes revealing unexpected courage. "Daniel," she begins, wiping flour from her hands. With deliberate calm, "I need you to listen very carefully. Your father is safe." The boy's eyes widened. "How do you—" "Sheriff Turner was recovered from a holding site north of town approximately 3 hours ago," she continues, her voice shifting from the gentle baker's tone to something more authoritative. "He's receiving medical attention and coordinating with federal authorities. The men holding him were neutralized." Daniel stares at her, comprehension dawning slowly as the European baker's carefully maintained facade begins to slip. "Mrs. Morgan, what are you? Who are you?" "Someone who protects people," Elise answers simply. "Someone who anticipated this situation and prepared accordingly." For a moment, Daniel simply processes this revelation, his teenage brain reconciling. The woman who taught him to make sourdough, with this new version speaking of neutralized threats with professional detachment. "Those people, they're all over town now," he finally says. "They've got guys watching the power station, the water treatment plant, 2 more at the cell tower. Mom says they're claiming it's security for their investment interests. But they're carrying guns, Mrs. Morgan, not even trying to hide them anymore." "I know." Elise moves to the front windows, closing the blinds with precise movements. "Tonight's community dinner is their cover for establishing complete control. They've isolated Havenbrook, neutralized official security response, and positioned personnel at all strategic infrastructure. It's a standard tactic for rural community acquisition." "Acquisition," Daniel repeats incredulously, "like they're buying the town?" "Taking it," Elise corrects, securing the front door. "Establishing an operational base with access to transportation routes, local resources, and isolated positions. Your father recognized the threat, which is why they targeted him first." Daniel's expression hardens with newfound resolve. "So what do we do? Fight back?" "We are already fighting back," Elise assures him, leading him toward the bakery's back room. "But I need your help with something specific. You know this town better than I do. The people, the connections, the hidden places." Behind the industrial mixers and flour storage, Elise reveals the concealed entrance to her secure room, the false wall sliding aside with mechanical precision. Daniel's gasp of surprise echoes in the small space as he takes in the surveillance. Monitors, communications equipment, and tactical gear arranged with military precision. "Whoa," he breathes, eyes wide at the revelation. "All this was here? The whole time?" 4 years of preparation, Elise confirms, activating additional monitors that display various locations throughout Havenbrook. "Now, I need you to identify these people." The screens show townspeople gathered in small groups, their expressions concerned as they converse in lowered voices. Mayor Wilson moves between households, clearly spreading information as Elise had subtly suggested. The hardware store owner, James Peterson, distributes what appear to be hunting rifles to several men behind his shop. "The community is already organizing resistance," Elise observes, "but it's uncoordinated, based on limited information. We need to channel that energy effectively before civilian casualties occur." Daniel studies the monitors with surprising focus, pointing to individuals and naming them rapidly. That's Mr. Peterson. He's an army veteran, serving in Afghanistan. Those guys with him are all part of the volunteer fire department. The group at the church is the town council. Well, most of them. And that's Dr. Rivera leaving the clinic with medical bags. She must be setting up a secondary treatment location. Elise nods approvingly. Exactly the information I need. Now, Daniel, this is important. Which residents have specialized skills? Military background, law enforcement, emergency response training? For the next 20 minutes, Daniel provides a detailed assessment of Havenbrook's human resources, identifying veterans, former police officers, medical personnel, and those with specialized knowledge of local infrastructure. Elise compiles this information with professional efficiency, integrating it into her tactical planning. One more question, she says finally. Where would people go if they needed to hide, not just for hours, but potentially days? Somewhere not on official maps with access to water and defensible position. Daniel considers this carefully. The old mining operation in Harper's Canyon. It was abandoned 50 years ago, but the main tunnels are still stable. We use them for the Halloween haunted house every year. There's a natural spring inside, multiple exits, and it's big enough to hold at least 100 people. Perfect. Elise activates her secure communication system. I'm coordinating an evacuation protocol for vulnerable residents, children, elderly, those requiring medical support. They need to be moved before Sullivan's team realizes what's happening. Daniel watches with growing amazement as Elise transitions fully into operational mode, issuing precise directives through encrypted channels, coordinating movements through her surveillance network, establishing security protocols with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Morgan, he interjects during a brief pause, who are you talking to? Who's helping us? People who owe me favors, she answers simply. Former colleagues with specialized skills, the kind of people who respond when certain codes are activated. A notification flashes on one of the monitors. Sullivan's team is on the move, expanding their perimeter control throughout residential neighborhoods. Time is running short. Daniel, listen carefully, Elise says, turning to face him directly. I need you to deliver messages to key people around town. Nothing written, nothing electronic. Tell them the evacuation point, the timeline, and that they should bring only essentials. 3-hour window maximum. I can do that, he affirms with surprising confidence. Nobody pays attention to a kid on a bike. Exactly. Elise retrieves a small communication device from a hidden compartment. Keep this with you. It's untraceable and operates on a frequency Sullivan's jammers won't block. If you see any of his people approaching Marshall Street, press this button twice. If you're personally threatened, press and hold until it vibrates. Daniel accepts the device, tucking it securely into his pocket. What are you going to do? Elise's expression shifts subtly, something in her posture transforming as she accesses the training and mindset that once made her legendary in circles. Daniel could never imagine. I'm going to attend a dinner party. As Daniel slips out through the bakery's rear entrance, Elise activates the final stages of her preparation protocol. From concealed storage compartments throughout the building, she retrieves equipment staged over 4 years of careful planning, communication devices, defensive tools, medical supplies, all disguised as ordinary items or hidden within structural elements of the bakery. Her secure phone vibrates with an incoming message. Federal response team mobilized. Earliest intervention, 0600 tomorrow. Containment recommended until authorized support arrives. Elise acknowledges the timeline, though her tactical assessment suggests Sullivan's operation will reach a critical implementation phase during tonight's community dinner. The gap between Sullivan's move and federal response requires her direct intervention to prevent civilian casualties and infrastructure compromise. From her personal quarters, she retrieves the outfit she's selected for the evening, a charcoal grey dress with sufficient ease of movement, low-heeled boots reinforced with composite materials, and a tailored jacket that conceals both defensive implements and her athletic physique while maintaining aesthetic appropriateness for a community dinner. As she dresses, Elise mentally reviews intelligence on Sullivan's key personnel, Garrett Sullivan himself, former special operations, dishonorable discharge after questionable actions during private military contracting work, tactically skilled but prone to overconfidence, right-handed shooter with slight compensation for previous shoulder injury, Rebecca Hayes, ex-intelligence operative, specialty in asset acquisition and information extraction, favors close-range techniques over firearms, known for psychological manipulation tactics and rapid threat assessment. The remaining team members present varying degrees of military or law enforcement background, most having transitioned to private security operations with histories of excessive force complaints. Well-trained but undisciplined compared to genuine special operations standards. Elise's assessment calculates a 17-person hostile force distributed throughout Havenbrook, with concentrated presence at the Mountain Vista Hotel, where tonight's community dinner provides their operational cover. Against this, she has her own specialized training, her network of positioned assets, and the emerging community resistance organizing under Mayor Wilson's unofficial leadership. The tactical disadvantage in numbers is offset by her intimate knowledge of the environment, the element of surprise her cover identity provides, and the sophisticated preparation she's implemented throughout 4 years of residence. As evening approaches, Elise receives confirmation that the evacuation of vulnerable residents has begun under the guise of an impromptu school camping trip and senior center outing. Sullivan's team has noted the movement but classified it as non-threatening civilian activity, another underestimation that works to Elise's advantage. Through her surveillance network, she observes Sullivan himself directing final preparations. At the Mountain Vista Hotel, his confident posture and expansive gestures suggest a man certain of his operational success, unaware that his team's communications are being monitored, their positions tracked, their tactical weaknesses catalogued by an opponent they haven't identified. At precisely 5:45 p.m., Elise activates the final security protocols for her bakery. Systems that appear to be standard business security measures but actually incorporate military-grade defensive capabilities. With her residence and business secured, she retrieves her evening bag, which contains specialized equipment disguised as ordinary personal items. The walk to the Mountain Vista Hotel takes exactly 7 minutes at an unhurried pace. Elise moves through the early evening with the composed demeanor of a business owner attending a community function, nothing in her exterior presentation suggesting the lethal capability concealed beneath her carefully constructed persona. Sullivan's security, personnel note. Her approach with professional assessment but minimal concern, their intelligence profile classifies her as a low-risk European immigrant with no identified security training or defensive capabilities. The perfect cover, cultivated through 4 years of meticulous behavior management. "Mrs. Morgan," greets the operative stationed at the hotel entrance, his practiced smile failing to mask tactical vigilance. "Mr. Sullivan mentioned you might join us. Please, right this way. The Mountain Vista Hotel's grand dining room has been transformed for the evening's event. Round tables draped in crisp linens accommodate Havenbrook's business owners and community leaders. A raised platform at the front features a podium flanked by digital presentation screens. The overall arrangement appears designed for a corporate presentation rather than community dinner. What most attendees don't recognize, but Elise immediately identifies, are the strategic positions occupied by Sullivan's personnel throughout the space. Each exit is covered by at least one operative, communication equipment disguised as audio-visual support. Additional security positioned on the mezzanine level with optimal oversight of the entire gathering. Elise! Thank goodness! You're here. Martha Wilson approaches with barely concealed relief, her usual composed demeanor strained by evident concern. Have you seen what's happening around town? Those security people are everywhere. Richard says they've implemented some kind of temporary safety protocol because of reported threats. But it feels more like an occupation, Elise finishes, quietly guiding Martha toward their assigned table while performing continuous security assessment of the room. Has Sullivan explained his actual intentions yet? No, but there's something very wrong, Martha confirms, lowering her voice further. The town council members were required to turn in their phones at the door for security purposes. Richard refused and was told he couldn't attend his own town's meeting without complying. And Sheriff Turner is still missing, though these people claim he's overseeing some security checkpoint on the county line. Elise notes the growing tension among Havenbrook's residents as they gather in nervous clusters, their conversations hushed, their glances toward Sullivan's team increasingly suspicious. The atmosphere carries the unmistakable energy of a community recognizing threat but uncertain how to respond. Just stay calm, Elise advises Martha, her tone gentle but carrying subtle authority. Whatever happens this evening, remember that appearances can be deceiving. Sullivan makes his entrance with calculated charisma, moving through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and offering reassurances that contrast sharply with the armed personnel positioned throughout the hotel. His tailored suit and confident demeanor project legitimate authority, though Elise notes the subtle tells of a man accustomed to violence, the controlled economy of movement, the constant environmental assessment, the tactical spacing he maintains without conscious thought. Mrs. Morgan, he acknowledges, reaching their table with Rebecca Hayes at his side. I'm pleased you could join us. I understand you're something of a cornerstone in Havenbrook's business community. Merely a baker, Elise responds with modest understatement, meeting his gaze with the careful deference her cover identity would display while cataloguing his tactical vulnerabilities with professional assessment. Though I've come to care deeply for this community. Community is precisely what brings us together tonight, Sullivan replies, his practiced sincerity almost convincing. Pinnacle Investment sees tremendous potential in Havenbrook. With the right protection and development, the emphasis on protection confirms Elise's assessment of their operational language. Sullivan isn't bothering with subtle intimidation anymore. He's transitioning to open declaration of control. I look forward to hearing your proposal, she responds neutrally, noting Hayes's careful study of her reactions. As Sullivan moves to the next table, Hayes lingers briefly. You seem remarkably calm, Mrs. Morgan, given the circumstances. Most of your neighbors appear rather concerned. European sensibility, Elise offers with practiced ease. We've seen governments and systems change throughout history. The foundations remain. Something in Hayes's expression shifts, the faintest narrowing of eyes, a subtle reassessment. Interesting perspective. I'd enjoy discussing European history with you sometime. The revolutions, the resistances, the fall of empires, fascinating patterns of power transition. The exchange carries multiple layers of communication beneath its superficial pleasantries. Hayes is probing, her intelligence training detecting something incongruous in Elise's composed response to what should be a deeply unsettling situation for an ordinary baker. History teaches valuable lessons, Elise agrees, maintaining her cover while acknowledging the subtext, particularly about underestimating seemingly ordinary people when their communities are threatened. Hayes's professional smile tightens almost imperceptibly before she moves away, her posture communicating increased alertness that Elise recognizes as elevated threat assessment. The interaction has placed her on Hayes's radar in a new category, not yet identified as the true threat she represents, but no longer dismissed as irrelevant civilian. As the room fills with Havenbrook's residents, Elise continues her methodical observation, noting which community leaders have arrived, which have conspicuously abstained, and how Sullivan's team has positioned themselves for what will clearly be a declaration of control rather than business. Proposal. Through her concealed communication device, she receives updates from her network, the evacuation of vulnerable residents proceeding according to plan, resistance groups organizing under Mayor Wilson's guidance, federal response teams preparing for morning intervention. The pieces are moving into place for confrontation that Sullivan's operational assessment has failed to anticipate. At precisely 7 p.m., Sullivan takes the podium, his commanding presence drawing the room to reluctant silence. Behind him, digital screens illuminate with the Pinnacle Investments logo, the professional corporate imagery designed to legitimize what Elise recognizes as nothing less than hostile takeover. Distinguished residents of Havenbrook, Sullivan begins, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to command. Thank you for joining us for this important evening. What I'm about to share will significantly impact your community's future, a future that Pinnacle Investments is committed to securing through our comprehensive protection and development program. The emphasis on securing and protection continues the operational language pattern, now transitioning to the public declaration phase. Around the room, Sullivan's personnel have moved to strategic positions, their stances shifting subtly from observational to control posture. As some of you may have noticed, we've already implemented enhanced security measures throughout Havenbrook, Sullivan continues, gesturing to screens displaying surveillance footage of his teams positioned throughout town. These measures are in response to credible threats to community safety and regional stability that local law enforcement lacks resources to address. The calculated undermining of Sheriff Turner's authority combines with subtle intimidation as the screens display Sullivan's armed personnel at key infrastructure points, the water treatment facility, power station, communication center, and main access roads. Effective immediately, Pinnacle Investments will assume primary security responsibility for Havenbrook and surrounding territories under our contractual agreement with key property owners. Sullivan's tone shifts from proposal to declaration, the pretense of investment opportunity abandoned for straightforward assumption of control. Murmurs of confusion and protest rise from the assembled residents. Mayor Wilson stands, his expression combining indignation with emerging courage. There's been no such agreement, Sullivan. The town council has approved no contracts, no security arrangements, and certainly no transfer of authority. Sullivan's smile remains unchanged, though his posture shifts slightly, a tactical adjustment Elise recognizes as preparation for potential resistance. Actually, Mayor Wilson, the legal framework has been established through our acquisition of controlling water rights, access easements, and strategic properties. As of this afternoon, Pinnacle Investments legally controls Havenbrook's essential infrastructure and access points. The screens shift to display legal documents with highlighted sections, most bearing signatures that Elise suspects were obtained through either misrepresentation or direct coercion. This is illegal, Mayor Wilson protests, other council members rising to join him in opposition. You can't simply take control of an incorporated town through property purchases. I assure you, we've followed all applicable regulations, Sullivan counters smoothly. Your town charter contains specific provisions regarding emergency management during infrastructure threats. Provisions we've legally activated through our controlling interest in essential services. As the confrontation escalates between Sullivan And Havenbrook's leadership, Elise observes the tactical positioning of his personal with professional assessment. Their formation has tightened, security personnel moving to isolate potential resistance leaders, communication signals passing between operators with the subtle efficiency of trained units. This is no longer business intimidation or criminal exploitation. Sullivan's operation carries the hallmarks of paramilitary occupation, suggesting objectives far beyond simple profit. The connection to Krasnov's international operations transforms this from local security threat to potential matter of national concern. Throughout the escalating tension, Elise maintains her composed observation, nothing in her demeanor suggesting anything beyond a concerned citizen witnessing troubling developments. Inside, however, her tactical assessment has shifted to active response planning, calculating optimal intervention points, identifying primary threats, and establishing protection. Priorities for civilian participants. Sullivan's declaration has accelerated her timeline. The 4 years of careful preparation, the positioned resources, the established contingencies, all now converge toward the imminent confrontation between the shadow and the forces threatening her adopted community. As Sullivan continues outlining his security protocols with thinly veiled threats toward those who resist, Elise receives confirmation through her concealed communication device that Daniel has successfully coordinated the community evacuation plan, moving vulnerable residents to the mining tunnels under protection of Havenbrook's emerging resistance. The pieces are in position. Sullivan believes he's declaring control over a helpless rural community. Instead, he's walking into a confrontation with one of the most lethal protection specialists ever to serve the Royal Guard, a woman whose determination to protect her adopted home equals the legendary status she earned defending royalty. 4 years of peace have been Elise's choice, but they've also been her preparation. Sullivan's team is about to discover why her designation in protection service was spoken in whispers by those who witnessed her work, and why those who threatened her principles rarely survived to attempt it twice. Sullivan's declaration hangs in the air like a storm front, his words transforming the Mountain Vista Hotel's dining room from community gathering to occupation announcement. The assembled residents of Havenbrook shift uneasily in their seats, expressions ranging from confusion to outrage as the implications become clear. "This is still America," Mayor Wilson protests, his voice carrying newfound strength that captures the room's attention. "You can't just march in with armed men and declare yourself in charge of our town." Sullivan's response comes with practiced patience, the reasonable tone of a man explaining unfortunate necessities to children. "Mayor Wilson, I understand your concern. Change is always difficult, but I assure you our presence here is both legal and necessary. The documentation has been filed with appropriate authorities. As the confrontation between Sullivan and town leadership escalates, Elise maintains her composed observation from her strategically selected seat. While appearing to be nothing more than a concerned baker, her tactical assessment continues, cataloging critical details. The positioning of Sullivan's personnel near exits, the concealed communication devices disguised as standard earpieces, the subtle hand signals passing between operators, indicating shift changes and security alerts. Most telling is the formation they've established around the room. Not standard event security designed to protect attendees, but containment protocol intended to control potential resistance. These men aren't bodyguards. Their occupation. Forces implementing the first stage of community subjugation. "Perhaps," Elise finally speaks, her voice carrying that quiet quality that makes others instinctively pause to listen, "Mr. Sullivan could clarify exactly what threat justifies such extraordinary measures." The room's attention shifts to the European baker, many residents surprised by her unexpected contribution to the confrontation. Sullivan's gaze finds her with calculated assessment, his expression suggesting mild curiosity rather than concern. "Mrs. Morgan, isn't it?" he acknowledges with professional courtesy. "A valid question. We've identified significant criminal elements attempting to establish trafficking operations through this region's mountain corridors. Your local law enforcement lacks the resources and training to counter such sophisticated threats." The explanation fits perfectly with Sullivan's cover story. Plausible, difficult to immediately disprove, and wrapped in the language of protection rather than control. Elise notes how several residents nod with cautious relief at this seemingly reasonable justification. "Curious timing," she responds, maintaining her baker's gentle demeanor while injecting just enough skepticism to disrupt his narrative momentum. Sheriff Turner has never mentioned such concerns in his regular community safety briefings. Sullivan's expression flickers for just a microsecond, a tell visible only to someone with Elise's specialized training in reading micro-expressions. Her simple observation has undermined his authority narrative more effectively than the mayor's direct opposition. Sheriff Turner has been briefed on the situation. Sullivan recovers smoothly. He's currently coordinating with our regional security team to establish appropriate protocols. His participation has been invaluable. The deliberate implication of Turner's cooperation represents standard psychological manipulation, undermining resistance by suggesting authority figures have already conceded. Elise notes several council members exchanging uncertain glances, their resolve wavering. Perhaps Sheriff Turner could explain these protocols himself, Elise suggests, her tone carrying polite reasonableness that masks the tactical precision of her intervention. His perspective would surely reassure the community. Sullivan's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly as Hayes shifts her position, moving closer to Elise's table with casual precision that fails to disguise her reassessment of the baker as a potential complication. "Unfortunately, Sheriff Turner is occupied with urgent security matters," Sullivan replies, his tone hardening slightly beneath its professional veneer. "As I was explaining before the interruption, Pinnacle Investments has established legal authority to implement these protective measures through our controlling interest in key infrastructure." Elise offers a small, apologetic smile. "Forgive my confusion, Mr. Sullivan. I'm just a baker with limited understanding of American legal structures. In my homeland, such control would require governmental authorization, not merely property acquisition." The subtle reminder of her foreign background serves multiple purposes, reinforcing her cover identity while introducing the concept of legitimate authority that Sullivan's operation lacks. Around the room, she notes residents nodding with renewed understanding, their innate American skepticism of unauthorized power beginning to override their initial intimidation. Sullivan's expression hardens, his tactical assessment of the situation visibly shifting as he realizes the European baker has effectively undermined his authority narrative with seemingly innocent observations. "Mrs. Morgan," he responds, his tone carrying a new edge beneath its professional courtesy, "your expertise in pastries is widely appreciated, but perhaps security matters are best left to those with relevant experience." The dismissal is calculated to diminish her standing in the room, a standard intimidation tactic to discourage further intervention. Instead of retreating, Elise rises slowly from her seat, her movement carrying such natural grace that few notice. How it places her in optimal position to observe both Sullivan's team and all primary exits. "Of course," she agrees, with modest deference that masks the tactical purpose of her new position. "I'm merely concerned for my adopted community. Perhaps that's why I've noticed your men positioned throughout town seem more focused on controlling residents than protecting them from external threats." The observation lands with precision, introducing doubt that spreads visibly through the assembled residents. Around the room, Havenbrook's citizens began to murmur in agreement, their previous confusion transforming into more focused concern as they recall suspicious activities they've witnessed throughout the day. Sullivan abandons his podium, stepping down to approach Elise directly, a power move designed to intimidate through physical presence. Hayes shadows him with professional vigilance, her hand casually positioned near her concealed weapon. "Mrs. Morgan." Sullivan addresses her with a lowered voice that carries just enough volume for nearby tables to overhear. "Your concern for Havenbrook is admirable. However, questioning security protocols during implementation can create dangerous confusion. Perhaps we could discuss your specific concerns privately after this briefing." The invitation carries unmistakable warning beneath its reasonable surface, a threat disguised as professional courtesy. Elise reads the calculated intimidation in his stance, the way he positions himself to dominate her space without appearing overly aggressive to observers. "I appreciate the offer," she responds, with unperturbed calm that visibly frustrates him. But community matters seem best discussed in community settings. Transparency builds trust, after all. Sullivan's tactical patience visibly thins as Hayes whispers something in his ear, her gaze fixed on Elise with newfound intensity that suggests her professional assessment has elevated the baker from curious anomaly to potential security concern. "Transparency is certainly our goal," Sullivan recovers, addressing the room with renewed authority. "Which is why I'd like to be completely clear about our current situation. Havenbrook faces sophisticated external threats that require immediate protective response. My team has established security perimeters based on validated intelligence and legal authorization." He gestures toward the screens, which display tactical maps of Havenbrook with security positions clearly marked. A visual demonstration of control intended to overwhelm resistance through implied power. These measures are temporary but necessary. Cooperation will ensure minimal disruption to daily activities. And if we choose not to cooperate? The question comes from James Peterson, the hardware store owner and Army veteran, his expression carrying the steely resolve of a man who recognizes tactics he's witnessed in conflict zones. Sullivan's response comes with practiced regret that fails to mask the underlying threat. Non-cooperation would necessitate more restrictive security protocols, potentially including limited movement permissions and communication monitoring. For everyone's safety, of course. The implied martial law declaration ripples through the room, residents exchanging alarmed glances as the true nature of Sullivan's operation becomes increasingly clear. Mayor Wilson rises again, joined now by other council members finding collective courage. "This is still America," Wilson repeats, his earlier statement carrying new conviction. "Your private security firm has no legal authority to restrict American citizens' constitutional rights, regardless of what property you may have acquired." Sullivan's expression shifts to something harder, the facade of a reasonable business investor giving way to the tactical commander beneath. "I'd hoped for a smoother transition, but it seems some demonstration of our authority may be necessary." He signals to his team with a subtle hand gesture that Elise immediately recognizes as an escalation protocol. Throughout the room, Sullivan's personnel move with coordinated efficiency, securing exits and establishing control formation around the assembled residents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sullivan announces, his tone now carrying undisguised authority. "Due to emerging security concerns, we'll be implementing temporary movement restrictions. Everyone will remain here while my team conducts necessary verification procedures." The containment declaration triggers immediate protest, residents rising from their seats in confusion and anger. Sullivan's team responds with practiced precision, their stances shifting to more aggressive control postures without yet drawing weapons, a calibrated show of force designed to establish dominance without triggering outright panic. Through the escalating confusion, Elise moves with deliberate calm, her position shifting to place herself between Sullivan's primary operators and the largest cluster of civilian residents. The movement appears natural, nothing in her demeanor suggesting tactical positioning to untrained observers. "Is detention without cause another of your security protocols, Mr. Sullivan?" she questions, her voice pitched to carry above the growing noise without seeming confrontational. "Or perhaps there's been some miscommunication about American civil liberties." Sullivan turns to her, his tactical assessment visibly recalculating as he recognizes that this European baker continues systematically undermining his authority with precisely targeted observations. Hayes steps closer to Elise, her movement carrying the controlled readiness that speaks of specialized training. "This isn't detention, Mrs. Morgan," Sullivan corrects with strained patience. "It's a temporary security measure while we verify." "There are no threats among the assembled group." "Threats?" Elise echoes with a perfect balance of confusion and concern. "Among Havenbrook's business owners and town council? That seems unlikely for a community you've presumably been investigating for investment potential." The logical inconsistency in Sullivan's narrative lands precisely as intended, sparking visible recognition among residents whose initial fear begins transforming into more focused skepticism. Sullivan recognizes the tactical shift in the room's energy, his expression hardening as he reassesses the European baker as a specific obstacle rather than incidental complication. "Mrs. Morgan," Hayes interjects, positioning herself directly before Elise, with practiced casualness that fails to disguise her tactical purpose. "Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable discussing your concerns privately. You seem particularly troubled by standard security procedures." The isolation attempt represents textbook counter-resistance tactics, separate vocal opposition from group support, neutralized through private intimidation, then return to a controlled environment. Elise recognizes the approach from her own training in managing security threats during royal events. "My concerns are no different from any residents," Elise responds, maintaining her composed exterior while calculating optimal response scenarios should Hayes escalate to physical intervention. "Though my European experience perhaps makes me particularly sensitive to unannounced security impositions." The reference to European authoritarian history lands with precision, residents around her nodding with newfound understanding as they make connections between Sullivan's actions and historical patterns of power seizure. Mayor Wilson steps forward, positioning himself alongside Elise with surprising courage. "Mrs. Morgan raises valid points that deserve addressing," he states, his political instincts finding firmer ground as community sentiment shifts. Havenbrook has established emergency protocols that don't include private security lockdowns without proper authorization. Sullivan's patience visibly evaporates, his tactical demeanor fully replacing the business investor persona as he signals his team with more urgent command gestures. Throughout the room, his personnel move to full security positions, some now openly displaying weapons as they secure exits and establish control formation. "This briefing is concluded," Sullivan announces, authority fully replacing persuasion. "For everyone's safety, all residents will remain here while my team completes security verification throughout town. Cooperation will ensure this process completes quickly and without incident. The open declaration of detention triggers immediate resistance, residents rising in protest as Sullivan's team moves to containment formation. Through the escalating chaos, Elise maintains her position of apparent calm, nothing in her demeanor betraying the tactical assessments and response calculations processing with professional precision. Hayes steps closer, her stance shifting to subtle intimidation posture as she addresses Elise with lowered voice. Your concerns seem particularly pointed, Mrs. Morgan, almost as if you have some specialized understanding of security operations. Unusual expertise for a baker. The probe carries professional assessment beneath its surface, Hayes's intelligence. Training clearly detecting inconsistencies in Elise's presentation that her background investigation failed to flag. Elise meets her gaze with composed dignity that reveals nothing of her internal tactical recalculation. "I'm just a woman who's lived through interesting times," she responds with careful ambiguity. "History teaches valuable lessons about power and its application." Hayes' expression tightens with professional suspicion. "Your history seems particularly instructive. Perhaps we should discuss it more thoroughly once this situation stabilizes." The implied threat hangs between them, Hayes clearly filing Elise for specialized interrogation once the initial control phase completes. Elise offers a small, enigmatic smile that reveals nothing of her tactical preparations now activating throughout Havenbrook. "History is always worth examining closely," she agrees, though it rarely unfolds as expected. Sullivan returns to the podium, his demeanor now fully commanding as he addresses the increasingly resistant crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and seated. My team will conduct brief identity verification before processing your release. This is standard security protocol during elevated threat conditions." The explanation fails to pacify the assembled residents, their initial shock transforming into more focused indignation as Sullivan's true intentions become increasingly transparent. James Peterson stands alongside Mayor Wilson, his military, providing visible counterpoint to Sullivan's authority posture. "This isn't legal detention," Peterson states clearly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone familiar with genuine security protocols. "You have no law enforcement authority in this jurisdiction." Sullivan's expression hardens further, his tactical patience clearly exhausted as his operation deviates increasingly from planned implementation. "My authority derives from contractual control of critical infrastructure and deputized security status through appropriate channels. Interference with authorized security personnel carries serious consequences." The legalistic justification prompts immediate challenges from multiple residents, the room's energy shifting from confused compliance to active resistance. Sullivan's team responds with coordinated movement toward control positions, their formation tightening around civilian clusters with practiced efficiency. Through the escalating confrontation, Elise observes every tactical adjustment with professional assessment, nothing in her demeanor revealing the counter-tactics activating through her concealed communication system. Throughout Havenbrook, her network has been monitoring this encounter, implementing coordinated response protocols based on Sullivan's escalating aggression. Hayes returns to Sullivan's side, whispering urgent communication that Elise recognizes as operational alert from the subtle shift in Sullivan's posture. His expression darkens as he receives concerning intelligence, his gaze finding Elise with newfound intensity that suggests his team has detected unusual activity throughout town. "It seems," Sullivan announces with strained control, "that some individuals have been coordinating unauthorized movement throughout Havenbrook. My team reports suspicious activity near critical infrastructure that necessitates immediate security response." The declaration confirms Elise's assessment. Sullivan's surveillance has detected the evacuation operations she coordinated through Daniel and the emerging resistance network. His tactical response will now accelerate toward full control protocols, rather than gradual implementation. Effective immediately, Havenbrook is under temporary security lockdown, Sullivan continues, abandoning pretense for direct authority. All residents will remain in designated safe zones until threat assessment completes. My team will provide necessary escorts to approved locations. The martial law declaration triggers immediate protest, residents rising in unified opposition as Sullivan's team moves to containment positions. Through the chaotic response, Elise catches Sullivan studying her with newfound calculation, his tactical assessment clearly reclassifying her from incidental complication to potential security concern. "You seem remarkably composed, Mrs. Morgan," he observes, approaching her with Hayes flanking his movement in standard protection formation. Most civilians find such security measures quite distressing. The observation carries professional reassessment beneath its surface, Sullivan's experience in tactical operations clearly detecting inconsistencies in her response patterns that contradict her civilian cover. Elise meets his gaze with the perfect balance of concern and dignity that her cover identity would display. "I've seen worse," she responds simply, the deliberate ambiguity allowing him to interpret her composure as related to her European background while revealing nothing of her true capabilities. Sullivan studies her with narrowed assessment, his operational experience clearly sensing something his intelligence failed to identify in their background investigation. "Have you indeed? Your file mentioned Austria, though your accent suggests more Eastern origins. Perhaps we should review your immigration documentation as part of our security verification." The probe represents standard counterintelligence technique, suggest specific knowledge to prompt revealing response. Elise recognizes the approach from her own training in identifying security compromises during protection operations. "My documentation is properly filed with appropriate authorities," she responds, with the precise balance of cooperation and dignity that maintains her cover while revealing nothing useful. "Though I'm curious what legitimate authority grants a private security firm access to immigration records. The counter challenges Sullivan's operational legitimacy without confirming or denying his implied knowledge about her background. Around them, the confrontation between residents and Sullivan's team escalates toward potential physical conflict, tactical positions tightening as resistance solidifies. Sullivan's expression hardens with professional reassessment, his gaze studying. Elise with newfound intensity that suggests her responses have triggered deeper suspicion. "Mrs. Morgan," he begins, his tone carrying a new edge beneath its professional courtesy, "I believe we should continue this discussion privately. Your perspective on security protocols seems unusually informed for someone in your position." The isolation attempt represents standard tactics for neutralizing potential intelligence threats, separate for specialized interrogation while the main operation proceeds. Elise recognizes the approach from both sides of similar encounters throughout her protection career. "I'm comfortable continuing our conversation here," she responds with composed dignity that masks her tactical preparations for potential escalation. Transparency benefits everyone during uncertain situations. Hayes moves subtly closer, her stance shifting to intervention position as Sullivan's expression darkens with tactical impatience. Before he can respond, his communication device activates with an urgent alert that draws his immediate attention. The information he receives visibly disrupts his operational composure, his expression tightening with controlled alarm as he processes intelligence that clearly contradicts his tactical expectations. His gaze returns to Elise with newfound intensity, reassessment clearly elevating her from curiosity to potential threat. "It seems," he states with careful control that fails to mask his operational concern, "that Havenbrook is experiencing unusual security anomalies throughout town, perhaps coincidentally aligned with our community gathering." The observation carries clear implication. Sullivan's team has detected the coordinated countermeasures Elise's network has implemented throughout Havenbrook. His tactical assessment has shifted from controlled implementation to potential operational compromise. Small towns often maintain their own security arrangements, Elise observes, with a neutral tone that reveals nothing of her direct involvement in those arrangements. Community connections run deeper than visitors might initially recognize. Sullivan's expression hardens with professional recognition, his tactical experience clearly detecting the subtle warning beneath her seemingly casual observation. Around them, the confrontation between residents and Sullivan's team maintains tense equilibrium, neither side yet escalating to physical engagement. "Mrs. Morgan," Sullivan responds, his tone now carrying an undisguised assessment, "I believe you and I have much to discuss regarding Havenbrook's security arrangements. My team has some specific questions about certain anomalies we've observed. Since arriving in town, the direct approach confirms Elise's tactical assessment. Sullivan has reclassified her as a specific person of interest rather than incidental civilian. His operation has detected elements of her countermeasures without yet identifying their source or purpose." "I'm simply a baker, Mr. Sullivan," she responds, with the perfect balance of confusion and dignity that her cover identity would display. "Though I'm always happy to discuss community matters with visitors interested in Havenbrook's welfare." The emphasis on welfare carries subtle counter to his security justifications, reinforcing community protection priorities while revealing nothing of her specialized capabilities. Sullivan's expression tightens with tactical frustration, his operational experience clearly sensing deception without identifying its specific nature. "I think," he states with carefully controlled authority, "we'll continue this discussion at our command center. Ms. Hayes will escort you there once we've secured this location." The detention declaration represents significant escalation. From general community control to specific targeting of identified security concerns, Elise maintains her composed exterior while her tactical assessment recalculates response scenarios based on Sullivan's accelerated timeline. "Is private detention another of your security protocols?" she questions with measured concern that masks her combat readiness. "That seems rather extreme for community investment discussions." Before Sullivan can respond, his communication device activates with an urgent alert that captures his immediate attention. The information he receives visibly disrupts his operational composure, his expression hardening with controlled alarm as Hayes leans closer to receive the same intelligence update. "It seems," Sullivan states with strained professional control, "that Sheriff Turner has been located in circumstances that contradict our earlier reports. Perhaps you might have insights into this development, Mrs. Morgan." The direct challenge confirms Elise's assessment. Sullivan's operation has detected elements of her counter-tactics without yet recognizing their full implications or her central role in coordinating them. The confrontation has reached a critical inflection point. Sullivan's team transitioning from community control implementation to specific threat response. "I'm pleased to hear Sheriff Turner has been located," she responds, with genuine relief that masks her tactical calculations. "His absence has been concerning to many residents. I'm sure his return will help clarify appropriate jurisdictional authority during this unusual situation." The emphasis on jurisdictional authority directly challenges Sullivan's operational legitimacy while revealing nothing of her involvement in Turner's extraction. Around them, the confrontation between residents and Sullivan's team continues escalating toward potential physical conflict, tactical positions hardening as resistance solidifies. Sullivan studies her with narrowed professional assessment, his expression carrying the focused calculation of someone recalibrating operational parameters based on unexpected developments. Whatever his team has reported clearly contradicts their intelligence preparation and implementation expectations. "Mrs. Morgan," he states with deliberate control, "I believe it's time we discussed your actual role in Havenbrook. My team has..." identified certain anomalies that suggest your bakery business may not represent your primary occupation. The direct challenge represents significant tactical escalation, from generalized suspicion to specific identification of cover inconsistencies. Elise meets his gaze with composed dignity that reveals nothing of her internal combat readiness as the confrontation approaches inevitable physical engagement. "I assure you," she responds with perfect balance of confusion and concern, "my sourdough is my primary occupation these days, though I'm curious what alternatives you might be imagining for a simple baker." The seeming innocence of her response masks the tactical preparations now activating throughout her body, muscle memory accessing combat capabilities maintained through years of disciplined training disguised as baking routines and exercise regimens. Sullivan's patience visibly evaporates, his operational demeanor fully replacing the business investor persona as he signals Hayes with a command gesture that Elise immediately recognizes as detention protocol. "I think," he states with cold authority, "it's time we continued this discussion somewhere more private. My team has some very specific questions about your background and activities since arriving in Havenbrook." Hayes moves with professional efficiency, her stance shifting to intervention position as two additional security personnel approach from tactical support positions. The coordinated movement represents standard detention formation for high-risk subjects, multiple operators maintaining triangulated control positions to minimize resistance options. Throughout the confrontation, Elise has maintained her baker's composed demeanor, nothing in her presentation suggesting the lethal capability concealed beneath 4 years of carefully constructed cover identity. As Sullivan's team moves to detain her, that facade prepares to shift, the shadow awakening beneath the baker's flour-dusted hands. 4 years of peace have been her choice, but they've also been her preparation. Sullivan's team is about to discover why her designation in Royal Protection Service was spoken in whispers, and why those who threatened her principles rarely lived to attempt it twice. Dawn breaks over Havenbrook with golden light that illuminates a town forever changed. The Mountain Vista Hotel stands quiet, its elegant facade marred by evidence of the night's confrontation. Broken windows, damaged furniture, the lingering presence of federal agents documenting the scene with methodical precision. Yellow crime scene tape cordons off the building, fluttering in the morning breeze like victory pennants. Across town, residents emerge cautiously from homes and emergency shelters, their expressions carrying the stunned recognition of those who have witnessed extraordinary events that defy their previous understanding of their quiet community. They gather in small clusters, exchanging whispered accounts of the night's remarkable developments. "Did you hear what happened at the hotel? They say she took down 7 armed men by herself." "The baker? Our Mrs. Morgan?" "Not a baker at all, apparently." Sheriff Turner stands outside his office, arm in a sling, but posture carrying renewed authority as he coordinates with federal agents and county officials. The communication infrastructure, temporarily disabled during Sullivan's operation, has been restored under emergency protocols, allowing contact with outside agencies and neighboring communities. Daniel watches from across the street, his teenage face bearing the transformed expression of someone forced into premature maturity by extraordinary circumstances. At his side stands his mother, relief at her husband's return tempered by lingering concern as she processes the night's revelations. "Will Dad be okay?" Daniel asks, though his question carries deeper layers than mere physical recovery. "He will," his mother assures him, her arm tightening around his shoulders. "You both will. This town is stronger than we realized." Inside the Golden Hearth, Elise Morgan moves with practiced efficiency, assessing damage with professional detachment. The bakery's front window, shattered during Sullivan's team's attempted raid, has been temporarily covered with plywood. Display. Cases stand empty, their contents never prepared during yesterday's interrupted routine. The kitchen remains pristine, untouched by the confrontation that transformed other parts of Havenbrook. The bell above the door chimes as Mayor Wilson enters, his expression carrying the weary dignity of leadership tested beyond expected parameters. He pauses, taking in the damage with concerned assessment before addressing the woman he now understands has never been merely a baker. "Mrs. Morgan," he begins, then corrects himself with careful respect. "Or should I use another name?" Elise turns to face him, her posture carrying subtle differences from the European baker he's known for 4 years. Though she wears the same practical clothing, her movement now reveals the fluid grace of specialized training, no longer concealed by careful restraint. "Elise is fine," she answers simply. "It's the name I chose when I came here." Wilson nods, accepting this partial truth with the pragmatism of a leader who understands some mysteries are best left unexplored. The federal agents say Sullivan's team has been completely neutralized, 17 operatives in custody, including Sullivan himself. They've connected them to international trafficking operations across 3 states. "That aligns with my intelligence," Elise confirms, the casual reference to personal intelligence networks revealing another layer of her true capabilities. Viktor Krasnov's organization was establishing a North American corridor using isolated communities as staging areas. Havenbrook's location made it strategically valuable, and you knew this. Wilson's statement carries no accusation, merely thoughtful assessment of the woman who apparently anticipated and prepared for threats beyond local comprehension. "I suspected," Elise clarifies. "When Sullivan's team arrived, I confirmed. My former colleagues provided additional intelligence once I activated certain protocols." Wilson studies her with new understanding, connecting fragments of observations from 4 years of community interaction that suddenly form a clearer picture. "Those renovations to your bakery, the security systems disguised as standard business measures, the strategic placement of every fixture and display. You've been preparing for something like this since you arrived." "I've been preparing my entire professional life," Elise corrects gently. "Havenbrook simply became my new assignment, self-assigned, but no less important than my previous responsibilities." Before Wilson can respond, the door chimes again as Martha enters, her normally composed demeanor still rattled by yesterday's events. She carries a basket of fresh muffins, the homemade offering contrasting with the sophisticated tactical equipment, now visible throughout Elise's bakery. "The neighborhood thought you might need breakfast," Martha explains, her gaze taking in the exposed security room with wide-eyed amazement. "Since your ovens are otherwise occupied." The delicate reference to the bakery's revealed dual purpose draws a genuine smile from Elise, perhaps the first truly unguarded expression her neighbors have witnessed. "Thank you." She accepts the basket with sincere appreciation, a thoughtful gesture after an unusual evening. Martha's curiosity clearly overwhelms her discretion as she surveys the sophisticated monitoring equipment now operating openly in what was previously disguised as standard storage space. "So all this time, while you were teaching me to make proper croissants, I was also maintaining specialized security protocols," Elise concludes with simple honesty. "The techniques for perfect laminated dough are still valid, regardless of my other capabilities." This practical observation, so characteristic of the baker they've known, somehow bridges the cognitive gap between Elise Morgan's dual identities. Martha's expression shifts from bewilderment to something approaching acceptance. "Well," she decides with practical finality, "your pain au chocolat has saved this town more than just last night." Though I admit your methods were unexpected, this understated acknowledgement of Elise's extraordinary intervention the previous night, when the composed Baker transformed into something else entirely before the astonished eyes of Havenbrook's residents, carries the beginning of community integration of her revealed identity. Outside, the street fills with increasing activity as federal agents establish perimeters around key locations connected to Sullivan's operation. Through the temporary plywood covering her broken window, Elise observes the systematic dismantling of the infrastructure Sullivan's team had established throughout Havenbrook. Communication jammers removed from strategic positions, surveillance, equipment discovered and neutralized, weapons caches documented and secured. The federal response teams say they've never seen anything like it, Wilson comments, watching the same activity with mayoral assessment. One woman anticipating and countering a paramilitary operation through years of advanced preparation. They're still trying to understand how you established such comprehensive countermeasures without detection. Patience and attention to detail, Elise responds, with the same phrase she's used countless times when explaining baking techniques to curious customers. Whether creating perfect pastry or security protocols, the principles remain consistent. Wilson's expression shifts to something more personal, the political leader momentarily setting aside official concerns for human connection. Why Havenbrook, with your abilities? You could have gone anywhere, done anything. Why choose our little town as your refuge? Elise considers his question with thoughtful assessment. After my last assignment ended, dramatically, I needed somewhere genuine. Communities like Havenbrook exist through real human connection, not transactional relationships. That authenticity creates something worth protecting. Her answer carries layers of meaning that Wilson processes with quiet consideration, understanding that this extraordinary woman chose their ordinary town for qualities they often took for granted. Before he can respond, Sheriff Turner enters, his uniform rumpled from the night's events, but his bearing carrying renewed authority. Mrs. Morgan, he acknowledges with professional respect that recognizes her capabilities without requiring their detailed explanation. Federal agents would appreciate your assistance identifying the remaining elements of Sullivan's network. They've found references to additional operations in neighboring counties. Of course, Elise agrees, moving toward the door with that fluid efficiency no longer disguised by her baker's careful restraint. At the threshold, she pauses, turning back to Wilson with unexpected vulnerability. Will Havenbrook be comfortable with my continued residence once the immediate situation resolves? My presence clearly brings complications. Wilson exchanges glances with Martha and Turner, the silent communication of community leaders assessing extraordinary circumstances with practical consideration. It's Martha who answers, her decisive tone carrying the weight of community sentiment. Your sourdough starter better not be compromised by all this excitement, she states firmly. The Founders' Day celebration is 3 weeks away, and your bread is expected at every table. This practical acknowledgement of Elise's place in the community, defined by her contributions rather than her concealed past, carries acceptance more meaningful than formal declarations. Elise receives the message with quiet gratitude, her composed demeanor momentarily revealing the woman beneath both Baker and operative identities. The starter is secure, she confirms with the faintest smile. Some preparations transcend operational parameters. The following days bring gradual return to normalcy, though Havenbrook's definition of normal has fundamentally shifted. Federal agents complete their investigation, documenting Sullivan's operation within broader criminal networks connected to international trafficking organizations. The Mountain Vista Hotel transitions from crime scene to community gathering place once more, though residents now view its elegant spaces with memories of extraordinary confrontation. The Golden Hearth reopens exactly 1 week after Sullivan's operation, its damaged window replaced, its interior restored to the welcoming bakery Havenbrook has known for 4 years. The security room remains partially visible behind its once concealed entrance, Elise having chosen partial transparency rather than attempting to restore complete separation between her identities. Customers return with a mixture of curiosity and appreciation, their interactions with the European baker carrying new layers of understanding. They accept their morning bread from hands they now know possess lethal capability alongside baking expertise. They exchange pleasantries with a woman whose quiet competence has revealed unexpected dimensions. Mrs. Morgan greets Amanda Lewis, the school teacher, accepting her usual order with careful consideration. The children have questions about recent events. They've heard stories that have grown rather elaborate in retelling. I wondered if you might consider speaking to my class about personal safety and community protection, in age-appropriate terms, of course. The request represents community integration of Elise's revealed capabilities, acknowledging her expertise, while incorporating it into Havenbrook's collective understanding, rather than treating it as separate from her established identity. I'd be honored, Elise agrees, her expression thoughtful as she considers appropriate content. Some security principles translate effectively to child safety without requiring specialized applications. This measured response, balancing professional capability with community appropriateness, exemplifies Elise's evolving integration of her dual identities. No longer fully concealing her protection expertise, she instead adapts it to serve Havenbrook's needs within a civilian context. 2 weeks after Sullivan's operation, Sheriff Turner hosts a community safety meeting in the town hall. Unlike Sullivan's, this event carries genuine transparency and community involvement. Turner stands at the podium, his arm no longer in a sling, but his expression carrying new vigilance born from direct experience with sophisticated threats. Havenbrook faces challenges like any community, he acknowledges to the assembled residents. But recent events have demonstrated both our vulnerabilities and our strengths. Moving forward, we're implementing improved security protocols developed in consultation with federal agencies and local resources. His gaze finds Elise, seated quietly near the back in her customary position with optimal sightlines to all entrances. The acknowledgement carries professional respect rather than the wary suspicion that characterized their earlier interactions. Some of these protocols were already in place without our knowledge, Turner continues, with dry understatement that draws knowing laughter from residents familiar with recent revelations. We're fortunate to have diverse expertise within our community that anticipated threats beyond our typical planning parameters. This official recognition of Elise's contribution represents formal integration of her capabilities into Havenbrook's security framework, acknowledging her specialized background while incorporating it within legitimate community structures, rather than treating it as a separate operation. After the meeting, Daniel approaches Elise with the direct manner teenagers adopt when processing complex revelations. Dad says you saved his life, that the men holding him were professionals who wouldn't have left witnesses once Sullivan's operation was complete. Elise studies him with honest assessment, recognizing that recent events have forced premature maturity on this young man who once focused solely on proper sourdough feeding techniques. Your father is an exceptional lawman who recognized the threat before anyone else, she responds, giving credit where genuinely due. My network simply provided extraction resources he would have eventually secured through other channels. Daniel processes this balanced perspective, his expression suggesting he understands she's allowing him appropriate agency in his father's narrative rather than claiming primary responsibility. He also says you've agreed to provide specialized training for his deputies, security assessment and threat response, within appropriate parameters for civilian law enforcement, Elise confirms with careful precision. Some techniques translate effectively to community protection without requiring specialized applications. The repeated phrase carries different meaning in this context, acknowledging the ethical boundaries between her previous lethal protection work and Havenbrook's legitimate security needs. Daniel recognizes this distinction with surprising maturity. "Will you still teach baking classes at the community center?" he asks, this seemingly ordinary question carrying deeper inquiry about her continued integration in Havenbrook's daily life beyond security functions. "Every Thursday afternoon," Elise confirms without hesitation. Proper lamination technique remains challenging for most beginners. Continuity provides stability during transitional periods. This practical observation, balancing continuity with change, captures Elise's evolved approach to her place in Havenbrook, maintaining valued contributions while gradually revealing additional capabilities as community needs require. 3 weeks after Sullivan's operation, Havenbrook celebrates its annual Founders' Day with traditional community gathering in the town square. Bunting decorates historic buildings, tables overflow with potluck contributions, and residents mingle with renewed appreciation for their community's resilience. The Golden Hearth's contribution dominates the central tables, artisanal breads, delicate pastries, and specialized European confections prepared with the same precision Elise applies to all her undertakings. She moves through the celebration with composed dignity, accepting appreciation for both her culinary contributions and her extraordinary intervention during Sullivan's operation. "Mrs. Morgan," Mayor Wilson approaches, offering a cup of coffee. As he joins her at the perimeter of the gathering, the federal agents completed their final briefing yesterday. They've connected Sullivan's operation to criminal networks in 7 states, possibly preventing similar takeovers of other isolated communities. "Expected outcomes based on identified patterns," Elise responds, with a professional assessment that no longer requires complete concealment. Sullivan's operational model suggested broader implementation than single community acquisition. Wilson studies her with thoughtful consideration. They also mentioned that certain aspects of their investigation were facilitated by intelligence from unnamed international sources, sources apparently activated by encrypted communications originating from Havenbrook. This oblique reference to Elise's external network, the colleagues and resources that responded to her activation protocols during Sullivan's operation, receives neither confirmation nor denial, merely the faintest acknowledging smile that Wilson correctly interprets as an appropriate boundary between need-to-know parameters. "The thing I keep wondering," Wilson continues after accepting this limitation, "is whether you chose Havenbrook randomly or for specific strategic value. Was our town special in some way we didn't recognize?" Elise considers his question with genuine reflection. "I researched 17 potential communities before selecting Havenbrook. Your town offered an optimal combination of geographic isolation, community cohesion, and essential characteristics." "Essential characteristics?" Wilson prompts, curious about this assessment of his lifelong home. "People who value each other beyond transactional relationships," Elise explains, her gaze taking in the celebration with authentic appreciation. "Communities that maintain genuine connection despite external pressures develop natural resilience against various threats. My previous work protected individuals in positions of power. Here I found something equally worthy of protection, a community that understands its own value. This honest assessment, acknowledging both strategic evaluation and genuine appreciation, captures the duality that has defined Elise's relationship with Havenbrook from her arrival. Wilson processes this perspective with a newfound understanding of the extraordinary woman who chose their ordinary town. Well, he decides with practical finality, whatever your initial reasons, I'd say you've become an essential characteristic of Havenbrook yourself. Your security expertise is appreciated, but your sourdough remains unmatched in 3 counties. This balanced acknowledgement of both her identities, protection specialist and baker, outsider and community member, represents the integration Elise has sought since establishing her new life. Her response carries genuine appreciation rather than composed performance. Community provides purpose beyond protection protocols, she observes softly. Havenbrook has given me something my previous assignments never offered, genuine belonging rather than operational parameters. Across the celebration, Daniel approaches Sheriff Turner, both carrying plates loaded with Elise's pastries. Their easy conversation and relaxed postures indicate healing from recent trauma through community connection, the resilience Elise identified as Havenbrook's essential characteristic, now facilitating recovery from extraordinary events. Seems your security contingencies included community restoration protocols, Wilson observes, noting the same healing process throughout the celebration. Remarkable foresight. Some preparations extend beyond immediate tactical response. Elise acknowledges sustainable security requires community resilience, not merely threat neutralization. This philosophy, balancing protection expertise with genuine care for community welfare, defines the integration Elise has achieved between her previous identity and her chosen life in Havenbrook. No longer completely concealing her capabilities, beneath her baker's persona, she instead adapts them to serve community needs within appropriate parameters. As evening approaches, Havenbrook's celebration transitions to the traditional bonfire and music that marks the conclusion of Founders' Day. Residents gather on blankets spread across the town green, their conversations carrying the relaxed cadence of a community that has confronted extraordinary threats and emerged stronger through collective response. Elise finds her place slightly apart from the central gathering, her position offering both participation in community celebration and optimal observation of surrounding conditions, the balanced approach that now characterizes her integrated identity. Martha joins her with 2 cups of cider, offering one with the casual confidence of established friendship. Remarkable recovery, she observes, nodding toward the gathering. 3 weeks ago, we were under hostile occupation. Tonight we're celebrating as if nothing happened. Not as if nothing happened, Elise corrects gently, as if something significant happened and was successfully addressed through community response. Resilience includes incorporating extraordinary events into a sustainable narrative. Martha considers this perspective with thoughtful assessment. Is that what you're doing as well? Incorporating your revealed identity into a sustainable narrative? The perceptive question captures the central challenge Elise has navigated since Sullivan's operation forced partial disclosure of her capabilities. Her response carries honest reflection rather than practiced performance. Integration rather than separation, she confirms. My previous work required complete compartmentalization. Havenbrook offers an opportunity for a more balanced existence. Well, Martha decides with practical finality, whatever balance you achieve, Tuesday Morning Book Club still expects your almond croissants, regardless of how many international operatives you neutralized in your previous career. This matter-of-fact acknowledgement of dual identity, while emphasizing continued community expectations, represents perfect distillation of Havenbrook's approach to their extraordinary baker. Elise receives this message with genuine appreciation. the faint smile that touches her lips reflecting authentic connection rather than maintained cover. As darkness settles over the celebration, Sheriff Turner activates the traditional Founders' Day fireworks display. Brilliant colors illuminate faces turned skyward, the shared experience of beauty uniting Havenbrook's residents in collective appreciation that transcends recent extraordinary events. Elise observes both the display and the community with equal attention, her professional vigilance now balanced with genuine participation rather than maintained separation. 4 years ago, she arrived in Havenbrook seeking refuge from violence, establishing a cover identity designed for complete concealment of her true capabilities. Tonight, she stands as both protection specialist and community baker, her dual identity, acknowledged and integrated rather than rigidly separated. The extraordinary skills that once served royal protection now adapt to community safety, while the baking expertise developed as cover has become a genuine contribution valued beyond tactical utility. The final fireworks illuminate Havenbrook, with cascading light that reflects on faces united in shared experience and renewed appreciation for their community's resilience. Among them stands Elise Morgan, former Royal Protection Specialist and current Master Baker, her chosen identity now enriched rather than compromised by partial revelation of her extraordinary capabilities. 4 years of peace have become the foundation for a new purpose rather than mere escape from previous identity. The Shadow now serves Havenbrook with both her lethal protection expertise and her genuinely developed baking skills, her dual capabilities integrated in service to the community that has given her authentic belonging beyond operational parameters. As the celebration concludes and residents gather belongings for homeward journeys, Daniel approaches with an unexpected question that captures Elise's evolved position in Havenbrook. "Mrs. Morgan," he begins with the direct manner teenagers adopt when addressing fundamental concerns, "after everything that happened, everything we learned about you, are you staying in Havenbrook permanently?" The question carries the community's central uncertainty following revelation of her extraordinary identity, whether the protection specialist they discovered beneath the baker's flour-dusted hands will remain now that her cover has been partially compromised. Elise considers his question with thoughtful assessment. "My sourdough starter requires daily attention," she responds, the practical observation carrying deeper commitment than elaborate declarations. Consistency matters in both baking and community integration. Daniel processes this characteristic response, recognizing the genuine commitment beneath its practical framing. "Good," he decides with teenage directness. "Dad says Havenbrook is safer with you than without you, and nobody else makes chocolate babka that good." This balanced acknowledgement of both her security expertise and her genuine baking skills represents Havenbrook's integrated acceptance of Elise's dual identity. She receives this acceptance with quiet appreciation, her response carrying authentic connection rather than maintained performance. "Community provides purpose beyond protection protocols," she observes, echoing her earlier reflection with deeper personal significance. Havenbrook has become home rather than operational location. As residents disperse toward waiting homes, Elise returns to the Golden Hearth with a measured pace that balances vigilant awareness with relaxed appreciation of evening tranquility. The bakery stands illuminated by soft interior light, its restored exterior revealing no evidence of recent confrontation, while its interior now integrates both exceptional bakery and sophisticated security installation with balanced coexistence, rather than rigid separation. Tomorrow morning will find Elise Morgan once again preparing dough before dawn, her skilled hands crafting exceptional pastry with the same precision once applied exclusively to protection operations. Customers will receive their daily bread from a woman they now understand, possesses lethal capability alongside baking expertise. She will exchange community information with awareness that her neighbors understand her attention, carries professional assessment beyond neighborly interest. This integration represents evolution rather than compromise. The shadow finding authentic purpose beyond royal protection, the baker developing genuine expertise beyond tactical cover. Havenbrook has given Elise Morgan opportunity for balanced identity, incorporating both extraordinary capability and ordinary connection, while she has given Havenbrook protection beyond its previous understanding, alongside exceptional pastry that elevates daily experience. 4 years after arriving as a carefully constructed cover identity, Elise enters her bakery as an integrated community member whose exceptional capabilities enhance rather than separate her from the town she has chosen to call home. The shadow remains vigilant beneath the baker's flour-dusted hands, but now serves community protection rather than royal security. Her lethal skills adapted to civilian context without compromising their professional excellence. As night settles over Havenbrook, Elise performs her security protocols with practiced efficiency, the bakery's sophisticated systems now operating openly rather than disguised beneath false walls and hidden compartments. Tomorrow brings anew, beginning in her evolved relationship with the community, acknowledged protector as well as respected baker, her dual identity integrated rather than compartmentalized. 4 years of peace have become the foundation for authentic purpose rather than tactical necessity. The European baker with a concealed past has become Havenbrook's acknowledged guardian, with extraordinary skills balanced by genuine community connection. The shadow serves new principles with the same dedication once reserved for royalty, protecting a community that offers belonging beyond operational parameters. The golden hearth stands quiet in the darkness, its dual purpose now acknowledged rather than concealed. Inside, Elise Morgan prepares for tomorrow's baking, with the same precision once reserved exclusively for protection operations. Her extraordinary capabilities now serving both security and sustenance for the community she has chosen to protect. Peace continues in Havenbrook, not through ignorance of potential threats, but through integration of exceptional protection within ordinary community life. The shadow remains vigilant beneath the baker's composed demeanor, but now serves acknowledged purpose beyond concealed operation. Extraordinary capability dedicated to preserving ordinary connection that provides authentic meaning beyond tactical objectives. 4 years after arriving as a carefully constructed cover, Elise Morgan has found genuine identity, incorporating both protection specialist and community baker, her exceptional skills now serving integrated purpose rather than compartmentalized existence. Havenbrook has given her authentic belonging, while she has given Havenbrook protection, informed by royal standards alongside exceptional pastry that elevates daily experience. In the darkness, the golden hearth stands as testament to this balanced integration, extraordinary capability harmonized with ordinary community, exceptional protection aligned with daily sustenance, remarkable skill dedicated to preserving simple connection, shadow and baker, protector and provider, extraordinary and ordinary. Elise Morgan embodies integration rather than separation, her complex identity now serving a unified purpose in the community that has become a genuine home rather than operational location. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.